Okay, we're live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Saturday Preschool for Philosophy and Black Liberation. Today is the first week after we closed the Year of Baldwin last week with a beautiful event. And like today onwards, we'll be talking about where we're headed this year. And I think like today's discussion is going to be really important for the direction forward. And so we'll start today talking about W.E.B. Du Bois and a new world movement of thought, and we'll talk about it in relation to the disintegration of the US empire. And I'll turn it over to Doc to begin the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Sambarto. And I'm very excited today. I have two of my friends here. First of all, I'd like to introduce everybody to Jerry Foreman. He and I went through graduate school together at Temple University. He's a more of an empirical sociologist, and beyond that, an astute analyst and observer of the political moment, and he keeps up, and we talk quite often on the phone about events and so on. And also, who you heard playing such beautiful music this morning.
Can I get a tip?
Dr. Fatih Rasool. We are very old friends, and
We won't tell you how long. It's before the temple days.
yeah. He is a person whose mind has always amazed me. As you can hear, he's an accomplished classical pianist and a ethnomusicologist and a linguist. And he is accomplished in all of these fields.
But I just want to add something that I'm sort of like a doctor in the sense I'm kind of like self-made, and then I just went to school so they could stamp and say, oh, you know. Because I knew Spanish before I became certified Spanish teacher. I knew it. And then they looked at the transcript and said, well, how can you be certified? You don't have an undergrad degree. I said, why don't you test me? I said, test me through you. Oh, I'm rusty. I said, well, I passed the test. So I have a tendency to push myself. I push myself on academia. He said, well, how is it that you know ethnomusicology? I said, well, I'm ethnic. I can play salsa. So that didn't make me follow. And I was just adding to what he said, because a lot of times we think of, well, this person's a this, he's a that, because he was approved by the academy. But I think that Tony always emphasized the importance of self-educating. And then you deal with the paperwork later. So like I said, my first teacher of the history of European thought was dealing with him. And so when I studied ethnomusicology and linguistics, for trends in Europe of philosophy, and I remember Hegel, von Herder, Locke, all the names that he used to just talk about, Kant, what have you. But then too, what I was impressed with how he remembered things. He remembered dates and names, and I was saying, and that inspired me that if you really know something, you shouldn't have to get a book.
Yeah. May I continue introducing you, Fatih?
Yeah. I was reintroducing him.
Yeah, he was reintroducing. But and he described himself perfectly. Knowledge for him was not something that you went to others to get. It was something that you pursued because you wanted to know. And Fatih, if you don't mind me saying, it is something of a nomad.
That's true.
He And if the situation doesn't fit him, he'll up and leave and quit a job with the quickness. Yeah. And, you know, he plays beautifully the European classical repertoire, but he also plays salsa, and he has studied in the Caribbean and in Africa the folk music or folklorica of those parts of the world. And while I talk to Jerry all the time, I hadn't spoken to Fatih for a few years, and
I didn't recognize his neighborhood. Looked by the house, but it's like the bourgeoisie came on top of him. So,
yeah.
you know.
From when it was the cold-blooded hood, you know.
Yeah, when I left, it was kind of run down except his house.
Yeah.
But then when I went to look for his house, I saw these nice places. I said, "What happened to Tony?" I said, "Maybe he moved." His house always looked nice, but the other ones around him,
It's not work got to be done. But at any rate, I said, you know, because I was thinking about our preparation for the symposium on these composers, Ellington, Mingus, Sun Ra, and Bootsy Collins. And I'm very limited. And I said, wow, the only person that could help us do this is Fatih, and let me call him. And it turned out that he's no longer in North Carolina. He's right across the bridge in New Jersey.
right next door.
You're right next door. And we talked, and I asked him if he would come to the free school this morning, and he did. And so I just want to, and I'm so happy that all of you all met him. And let me just tell you something, and this might come across not as so confident like last night. But I was walking around while he was playing, and something just struck me. Said, wait a minute, this is familiar. And I remember vaguely a dream I had several years ago of something almost just like this. And him, huh? Yeah, it happens like that. Somehow that these two are here and can meet you all. And for Fatih to grace us with a bit of a classical concert, pianistic concert before free school. So I just wanted to say that. And to me, it fits well with what we're trying to do here in the free school.
I just wanted to just add one thing to close it out. That because I know our initial encounter, I'm playing love songs and banjo with it, but academically, I independently started getting involved in the interplay between written and oral traditions. So in terms of ethnomusicology, even though my focus was on, I did a master's thesis on southern Spain, the Moorish influence, how Spanish composers drew on they call it gypsy music, some call it Roma, and then how this worked itself into Latin America and then took me into the Spanish-speaking Caribbean. So what I started getting involved, on one hand, I was doing Iberian studies, then the other side, I was dealing with Afro-Caribbean studies. And see, when you talk about Dominican Republic, 'cause I lived there for 3 years, you got the ballet politicos. Their goal was to give you a panorama view of the culture. So they'd have a dance performance where they have a dance called Mangolina, which is more European. Then you have the Palos, which is a big drum dance, reminds you of Afro-Cuban music. Then they have what they call the Carabine, which is more French Haitian connection. So I got the idea that when you deal with Latin America, you have to understand that you got these cultural practices moving simultaneously. The hard part about research, they tend to make us feel linear, like things change and this one stops. But what happened in Latin America keeps on going. So then you have, and then the Paulo drums came out of a popular religious tradition, very much like Santeria. So I talked to the doctor a lot about the preschool of when you bring in the issue of the African coming together with the European, it played itself out differently in the Spanish speaking, the Portuguese speaking, French speaking, and English speaking world. Then when I came back to study American music, that's why I came up with the banjo. The juba was a plantation dance. But why did the composer take it and make a concert piece out of it? So the same thing happened here. It drew me in to deal with classical music written by African Americans, like R. Nathaniel Dett, Florence Price. You got George Walker. And a lot of them, they would allude to a juba dance. They had this thing about the juba, as opposed to looking at it as something disgusting, you look at it as a jubilee. Like when you dance the juba, it means something good is happening. So I would just bring that up that it's not, I don't see it as Latin America versus North America, black versus white. If you think more culture and cultural practices, performance practices, it's a whole different approach to research. So I would like to bring that component to the preschool.
And I would invite you to join us. There are four of us already that are tasked with preparing and organizing this symposium, probably near the end of April, the beginning of May. So I'll keep you informed.
Okay, sure.
Thank you very much. But we have, as all of you all know, been spending a great deal of time and effort in understanding the modern world, the emergence of the modern world and the modern state and its ideological and philosophical foundations. But in the end, our journey to understand the world is to know it so that we can change it, or to understand it as it changes. We are clearly, it seems, in a new era and perhaps a new epoch of humanity. We are already witnessing profound change. The changes are vast and in many respects either revolutionary or pre-revolutionary. Some of the changes, especially in technology, are dramatic and therefore undeniable, such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, new initiatives in space exploration, discoveries of never before observed subatomic particles, and then, of course, derivative of much of this fundamental science are new technologies and devices, such as new chips, computer chips, and devices that shape the everyday lives of people, such as the cell phone. Other changes are more difficult to locate and define. I would say these are changes that occur in a pre-revolutionary moment, especially in American history. But one could say also in the history of humanity. I would like to return to this idea of humanity in the throes of a pre-revolutionary moment, because in some ways this does not easily fit the concepts of the epoch and the moment articulated by those revolutionaries of the 19th and early 20th century that brought into being some of the great revolutionary changes of modernity, in particular the Russian and Chinese revolutions and the anti-colonial movements. They would say that what we are experiencing today is but a further movement in that epoch. I would like to suggest perhaps that that epoch was concluded and perhaps we entered and are now living through a new epoch where a new revolutionary moment, which is qualitatively different from what we normally think of the revolutionary moment. Let me be more concrete. You know, most people would say that the high point of revolutionary change occurred in the early part of the 20th century with the Russian Revolution and then the Chinese Revolution. You could add on the Indian independence movement, the African independence movements. All of that was seen as part of a single whole. And that what we are now experiencing is not the possibility of a new revolutionary moment, or we are in a pre-revolutionary moment. But as I am going to try to argue it, and you know, we talk a lot about chronology, and that's a useful concept to use. However, I'm not completely satisfied with the word chronology. And I'll try to find a different language than chronology. In fact, I think looking at the movement of history as distinct and specific movements of human beings better captures what I would like to argue this morning. You know, in part, I guess I should say, maybe leaping a little bit ahead of ourselves, that never before have so many human beings been involved in the processes of change as is the case today. Never before has humanity as such, and here we're talking about 8 billion people at least, been conscious of the world in which they live as is the case today. Some would argue, perhaps, that most people participate negatively in the struggle for change and not positively. I am not convinced of that conclusion. I think I would argue that more people are positively engaged in social change than ever before in history. Yes, I want to come back to the allegory that we watched last night in the animated film. A lot of people would ask, why does free school devote so much time to ideological and philosophical matters? Often, that question is another way of attempting to discredit what we do. A lot of people would say, well, the struggle is a matter of practical deeds. That to think about ideas, and certainly as we have done to go back to the Renaissance and the Reformation and the French Revolution and the American Revolution is redoing what academic thinkers have already done, and that we are nothing more than, I guess they would put it this way, a fake academic organization trying to do what most academics at prestigious universities have already done. Now, anybody who has spent time in a, quote, prestigious university or even a not prestigious university knows that the unhappiness of graduates and students is that they don't do what free school does. And, but the default to anarchism, as it were, and dogmatism and nihilism is not a substitute for deep scientific and ongoing engagement with the world as it is in our attempt to realize a world as it should become. The fierce urgency of now is not to default to, quote, the struggle. And in the United States, we kind of know what it means, which betrays the essence and the real intent of the people who use this idea of practical struggle as a way not to get involved in ideas. Well, let's look at them. In the current moment, they are trying to uphold and give boldness, I guess, to the Democratic Party. Here in Philadelphia, there are several organizations which claim to be fighting for a budget for the people and opposing the current mayor's budget and budget and governmental approaches of the Trump administration. You'll see Bernie Sanders going around the country trying to speak to the working class. Others who take up issues more of a more ideological worldview character, such as the LGBTQ or queer movement, which itself, while it is a call to action, different than the those who want to change government policy, it's a call to action. It's a call to a different kind of action, which is grounded in a set of theories and philosophies. And, you know, it's quite interesting that in the bourgeois and petty bourgeois zone of ideas, queer theory is the dominant social theory. A lot of people do not understand how to understand this. For its proponents and advocates, and they are prolific, not only in the academy, but specifically in the academy, but also in cultural life, in Hollywood, in the arts, in music. And the essence of queer theory, or the claim of queer theory before the essence, the claim of queer theory is that it is what in physics theory used to be called a theory of everything, a unified theory of society and its history, which erases from that history of humanity very things, for example, that W.E.B. Du Bois, Baldwin, and before them, the revolutionary philosophers and thinkers of modernity. I wish to return to that, but I don't. I wish to hold on to this idea that in the postmodern moment, the dominant social theory is queer theory, which claims to be a unified theory of everything in society and even of the social future in a transhuman future. This is very important because it is not for nothing that the trans person is seen as the central figure of social reality and social conflict at this point. That is not a small matter. And we'll come back to that. The ancient idea that the great struggles of human beings are the struggle that originate in cosmic forces which manifest in human forms, where the masses are more or less passive and at best observers, and in fact seek protection in these great cosmic forces. And that, as I thought about it more and more last night, didn't get enough sleep, and this morning, even though I have a problem because I'm a slow reader of reading subtitles, I guess I'm a slow reader because I get lost, focused on certain words, and then trying to look at the pictures, and it's a kind of. But I think I got the gist of it and the worldview that was being presented, and it is an ancient one. That the heroes of these allegories are defined by struggle to realize their destinies in order to help ordinary people realize theirs. It's so interesting. However, modernity is a direct attack upon these notions.
Right.
That from the rationalist and empiricist perspectives are seen as metaphysical meanderings without empirical or rational justification. That's why at one time looking at the movie, I just said, oh, it's definitely not Kant. And I didn't mean, it just, sometimes how you just shout out something. And what I was saying, it is definitely not the rational construal of phenomenon. It is a different worldview. Not without merit, by the way, I should say, but you have to understand allegory to understand it. And those allegories are not for children, by the way. I guess for some children who are prodigies. But there'd have to be a kid's version of that film made, I think. In some ways, there is a way to approach and understand the inconsistencies of this moment, the unclarity of this moment. It's, and Shantanu and I were kind of talking about this last night. One day you see, you can feel optimistic, like when Trump and Vance B-slapped Zelensky. I mean, that was a moment of celebration because he was slapping the Western world order. And the next day he comes out with statements about the Palestinian people, which is a descent into darkness. And how, I don't know how else to describe it, a kind of barbarism and inhumanity that in some ways white modernity brings into this moment. And you ask yourself, can they do better? Is this what they are and will be? You know what I'm saying? You know, when Ross Douthat, after Trump had been shot, wrote this important article, I think, in the New York Times saying that Trump was the man of destiny, Hegel's man of destiny, like Hegel described Napoleon. And in the free school, we said, no, he is not the man of destiny. And we reference Karl Marx's Louis Bonaparte, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. Louis Bonaparte, as you remember, was the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. And in the early 1850s, he established a dictatorship in France, which he said was to restore the Napoleonic rule of maybe 40 some years earlier. It was, I guess, for that time, his way of saying, I will make France great again. And Marx said, of course, as Hegel knows, history comes in twos. First as tragedy, then as farce. And we said that Trump, and I think to our credit, we said that Trump is not a man of destiny. He is a historical farce. That is, and by farce, I don't think it is necessarily a put down. It's to say he is imitating something great. And he, as things stand right now, cannot be considered great. In spite of, people like Scott Ritter and Stephen Bannon and so on. The man of destiny comes with a positive vision of the future. Farce can only be a destructive force, destroying the old, preparing the way for a new revolutionary moment. Trump, to use the language of Du Bois, thinks he can walk backward into the future. Trump represents the failure of consciousness in a pre-revolutionary time. A failure of consciousness. And this is why the year of Baldwin is so important as an intellectual and philosophical project with the people. A failure of consciousness rooted in white supremacy. Thus, a failure to rise, as the allegory would have it, to a cosmic destiny. In fact, there is something of anarchism and nihilism chaos, lack of direction, lack of moral and philosophical grounding in this whole thing. You know, as they say in the Bible, know the truth and the truth will make you free. Does Trump know the truth? Does he respect the truth? Is everything a default to him and people like him? You know, if so, you know, we can only await his leaving the stage of history and for something else to arise. And the moment is pregnant with those possibilities. That is what makes it so frustrating. You know, what do you mean putting the ambassador of South Africa out of the country because he protested your claims about discrimination against white South Africans? Why is that even an issue for you, given discrimination against black people in this country? You know, you just can't, there's no way to reconcile him with the possibilities of this moment. However, there are answers to the questions that we and many others throughout the world ask. I would say part of those answers, if not the essence of those answers, can be found in Du Bois. Why do I say this? You know, to make such a claim is to welcome pushback and ridicule. What do you mean, Du Bois? How do you overlook Kant and Hegel and Marx? You know, and I want to get back to them. Because in saying Du Bois is not to overlook the great achievements of classical German rationalism or even English empiricism. It is not a negation in the simple-minded sense of modernity and modern philosophy. It is to acknowledge it, to embrace it, and to move on from it. And I want to explain that. I guess my thinking on these matters developed out of preparing for the presentation that I gave at the Free Library on Du Bois and, you know, the art of his sociology, of social science. And as I said, it was, you know, it took a lot, frankly, out of me, and I still don't know if I have it right. But Du Bois, the essay that really was decisive for me was his essay written in 1890 at 22 years old, entitled Leonardo as a Scientist, where he makes the claim that it's not Francis Bacon or others who founded empirical, he called it experimental science, but it was Leonardo da Vinci, 100 years earlier. This was amazing, and it kind of fit into what I was trying to get at, but didn't know how to get at. This fact of art as a part of an epistemological working up of knowledge that, contrary to, let us say, Immanuel Kant, a great, great philosopher, or Hegel, that the human agent, the human being, does not only default or rely upon reason in the understanding of phenomenon and experience, but she and he can, if properly done and understood, find art. And as Du Bois kind of situates it for the American people, the Black proletarian imaginary is as much and maybe more important than the architecture of reason in the uncovering of knowledge, especially about the human. And so Du Bois, in trying to locate Leonardo's place in the unfolding of science, uses this language, the attempt to find the origins of great movements of world thought. And isn't that what we're talking about?
Right.
A great movement or great movements of world thought. Or put another way, the history of human consciousness and the different moments in that history of the development of human consciousness. And for us, the movement of world thought and the development of human consciousness are inevitably interconnected and cannot be separated. Human consciousness does not just develop out of the fact of oppression and exploitation, and suddenly we become conscious. It must be the phenomena of human suffering, of human striving, and world movements of thought. And I think Du Bois is accurate and to the point where he says that great thought is a movement of world thought. And therefore, if we are to make the claim, as I think we must, that Du Bois is a great thinker, I think we understand his greatness best in understanding that he is at the originary moment of a new moment of world thought. And why was a new moment of world thought necessary at the beginning of the 20th century? What had changed between the time that produced Kant and Hegel and Marx and the moment that produces Du Bois?
Right.
What were the issues of humanity that Du Bois attempts to explain and to discover universal truths in that were not present at the time that Hegel and Kant, Descartes, if you will, even Leonardo wrote and thought? And I want to make the claim that it is the anti-slavery struggle. Du Bois says accurately a point that is not even addressed or minimized, if addressed at all, by historians and radical social theorists. The anti-slavery struggle emancipated more working people than any previous movement in modernity. 4 million workers were emancipated. Du Bois's location of the enslaved African in a labor system of capitalist production and profit, which itself was at the foundation of a whole world system that was in becoming, is a discovery of, how could I say, of scientific achievement that lays a foundation for all social science going forward. I hope that makes sense where I put that. It is this emancipatory and democratic process that creates the foundation for a new world movement of thought and a new world movement of human consciousness. And I hope nobody thinks, oh, I'm minimizing the great scientific achievements of Marx or of Hegel or of Kant. I'm not at all. At all. But they were addressing human emancipation and democracy in an era that precedes the emancipation of 4 million slaves. It is a qualitative difference and stage in human history, right, completely overlooked and dismissed, except by Du Bois. Everything that he writes leads up to this recognition. And of course, Black Reconstruction, if properly read and understood, is his scientific summation of world processes and where they lead and what are the consequences for thought of them. I'm talking in a different, I want to talk more concretely. The world changed with the emancipation of 4 million slaves. The definition of democracy, the definitions of humanity, the definitions of reason, of what could be known and what must be known, changes. You know, let me just give one example. The great achievement of Immanuel Kant was not only discovering a new synthesis of philosophical movements. I don't want to get into too much detail about that right now. But that knowledge, to be knowledge, must recognize its limitations. In other words, to produce scientific knowledge, we must at the same time acknowledge that we are limited in what we can know. And if we go beyond the bounds of rational limitations upon knowledge, we go backwards into metaphysics, into cosmologies, into metaphor. Well, just think about it. I think it'll make sense. But he was basing all that he knew upon the great movements in Europe, from the Renaissance through the Reformation, through the Enlightenment, through all of the wars and rebellions, the 7-Year War, the 30 Years War, the questions of the modern state, all of that, which were framed within the framework, I should say, of the bourgeois and democratic revolutions. Kant, Hegel, especially, could never imagine the freeing of 4 million African proletariat. It was historically, even philosophically, necessary to even consider. Not to know, but to even consider. And knowledge should be confined to those things that are socially or scientifically or philosophically significant. The freeing of 4 million slaves was not a necessarily significant event for them. But for Du Bois, it was the most significant event. You could see the dialectic beginning to play itself out here. And by the beginning of the 20th century, Du Bois would say, he says it not with full confidence that he was absolutely right, or not with the confidence of the consequences of what he said, but he merely said it beginning in 1900 at a Pan-African conference in London, that the problem of the 20th century is the color line. And here you have a conflict of worldviews, because the most advanced thinkers of the Enlightenment, in particular Karl Marx and his followers, has said that the problem of modernity is the problem of the working class and class exploitation. Du Bois said the problem of the 20th century, which is another way of talking about the problem of modernity, is the problem of the color line, which is a metaphor in itself for what we experienced in this country, including slavery and colonialism and the suppression of peoples all around the world. The European thinkers, and I'm not going to dwell on this too long, took as a given that the agents of modernity and the agents of history and historical progress were in Europe. So Kant is concerned with human agency in the production of knowledge. But the agent is always European. And while he may not have seen it this way, others would, of course, with the preoccupation with whiteness, which could be interpreted as the agents of human knowledge were white. And thus the color line was a way of identifying agency at every level: agents of political change, agents of revolutionary change, agents of science, of thought, and of course, of great movements of human thought. But then, why would you need a new movement of world thought? Hadn't we, Europeans in the modern world, pretty much resolved all of the great questions? There would be debates after Hegel, of course, Nietzsche, the crisis of identity and meaning after the world wars, and thus the rise of existentialism and Sartre. But it is all a part of a single project that goes back, let us say, to the origins of modernity, to Leonardo, you know, and on and on. A great and magnificent achievement. It would be easy to spend a lifetime, productively as it were, in the study of all of this. I mean, Immanuel Kant is my favorite philosopher. And so Bartow and Purba and I went to the University of Pennsylvania library. And because they, talk when we're going to go and study Kant. And I hesitated because, the year of Baldwin, it took a lot out of me, 3 reading groups. And but then I took a week off and then I was ready and we went over there and we began to talk about Kant. And after a few hours, Purba announced, I need to take a nap. You remember that? Yeah, eat some food first. She said, where we gonna go eat? I said, but we've only just begun. And we all had to acknowledge that in many ways Kant is more difficult than doing physics. Philosophy is, we had to say, it was so funny. And I said, I said to myself, now Purba understands why I had to take my time in getting into this. Because one, I had not, been reading and thinking about Kant for some time, for a couple of years, few years. And to understand Kant and Hegel, you literally have to live with them. And, so I had to get out my old critique of pure reason and go back through my underlining and then to kind of explain what was going on to some Bartow and Purba. I don't know how well I did it, but it was a beginning. And by the way, the 2 great works of classical German philosophy and classical modern European philosophy is classical German philosophy. Everybody else is kind of a preface, as Kant calls it, a prolegomena, preface to classical German philosophy. And the 2 greatest works of classical German philosophy are Kant's Critique of Pure Reason and Hegel's Science of Logic. That is the high point, the highest point in many ways that philosophy has thus far achieved. Now, that we know. I mean, there's some people who said there were great civilizations before the Ice Age. These great mysteries and all of that type of thing. Maybe there were. But to the best of our knowledge, and I don't want, somebody to say, well, let's go and look at the way the pyramids were built. I'm down. But to the best of our knowledge, the best philosophy, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason and Hegel's Science of Logic. And most Western philosophy since have been chipping around the edges. Oh, well, he didn't say this. Okay. But you can't go to the heart of it. Because that's one of those existential moments where you jump into that. It's a life and death struggle.
Right.
Does that make sense to you? So I'm going to overturn Kant. And I guess Kant is saying there from his grave, come on now, do it. Let's see what happens. You jump in there, and before you know it, you're in a whirlwind that you can't escape from. You know what I'm saying? That's why I just concede you the man. I'm serious. That's the way I roll. You know, with that, you the man, I got to give it up. For that moment, for what you doing, the conditions you doing it in, you the man. I'm not going, like Nietzsche said, oh, you talking about this great system of ideas and logic, and I'm still unhappy. So I'm gonna write something about my unhappiness, as or hide it. Yeah, I feel you, Nietzsche. Feel you. You know, the transubstantiating or the transvaluation of values. All of that. I'm down. But you talking about what he didn't do, but what about what he did in the advancement of thought and science? And that's what they were trying to do. And the production of knowledge. Until you get up to the present time, this is why postmodernism and queer theory is such a fraud. It's all about, there is no truth but my truth. It's me. How can you tell me how I should feel? Have you ever, yada, yada, have you ever been black? Have you ever been black and queer? Okay, all right, I feel your pain. But we're talking about a new moment. And to realize this new moment, you must first acknowledge the greatness of what was achieved. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, you try to act like that wasn't all that, the Leonardo wasn't nothing, they all white, they all men, yada, yada, yada. You're going to get yourself caught in a downward cycle, and you ain't going to do nothing but sit in the corner and pout. Okay, that's enough on that. What Du Bois discovers and what his work does, is that it begins a new world movement of thought that reflects a new moment in human history. The human as the human, all 8 billion of us. The ever presence of the now and the future that arises from now. I guess I could end with this. All of the questions that we have tried to address, and of course, it might sound a lot better from a professor who only looks at part of these matters or is an expert in things that we try to talk about and explore. I know coming from their mouths, coming from their minds, it sounds better to me. I said, I wish I was as articulate and as smart as this expert at the University of Chicago who has done nothing for most of his life but study Kant. I really do. I feel, oh shit. But I think we are trying to do something else. We are trying to understand a world movement of thought, its origins, and how it is moving through our lives, and how we must grasp it and become a part of a great movement of world thought. that we do not seek to walk backward into the future. We seek to walk into the future conscious and committed to it. We, like the great thinkers of modernity, especially Kant and Hegel, I'll talk about them, and Marx, who were committed to freedom. They all supported the French Revolution and its most radical wing. And to have supported the French Revolution in Germany at the time that Kant wrote and stood up for the French Revolution was like supporting the Soviet Union during McCarthyism or whatever. But we have entered upon a new stage of history. The human situation now is not what it was 200 years ago. Human beings, be they in North Philadelphia or Bengal or South China or Mozambique, there is a similarity to their being and their practice. You know, it's quite astounding. You go to China and sometimes you say, well, they're acting too Western. Other times you say, but they're aspiring to the same things that I see a kid in South Philadelphia High School aspiring to. Or you go to Bengal and you say, well, they look much like what I'm seeing in North Philly. I come back to North Philly. Well, I miss North Philly. I miss Philadelphia. But I wasn't all that far away from it in Bengal, you know? Because there is something common and similar to them. Right. No village in the world is so isolated that it's not in touch with the world in some way, shape, or form. This is new. For most of the history of anatomically modern human beings, we've either lived in nomadic or small communities, communal situations, where all that we knew and all that we had to know was my mother, father, brother, cousin, and extended family. The division of labor was between a small group of people. We were communistic. We generally accepted gender equality, as it were, and such. Today, all economic and social processes and ideological processes are global. And that is why if you go to Russia or China, they say to the United States, we don't want your soft power via queer theory. We're not doing that. What they are in effect saying is that the nihilism that pervades the West, the impatience with the human and the human possibility that pervades America and the West, so much so that we want to rush to replace the human being with machine intelligence, to transform the human being through pharmaceutics and chemicals and surgery and cognitive manipulation to produce something the likes of which never existed and no one ever aspired to. That's why the allegory is so important, because at the center of the allegory, the Chinese allegory, is the human fighting out cosmic battles of right and wrong, good and evil, beauty and ugliness. It's just so, but everything is the human. So do we throw tens of thousands of years of human consciousness out and turn it over to a machine? Well, if you want to go down that road, you go ahead with your bad self. I prefer the human project. And I think that's what we have to say. Let me just end on this. Don't give the current Donald Trump regime any space to do more damage to human beings, no matter what good he might do. He doesn't deserve it. He hasn't earned it.
Right.
And if he had even tried to earn, he doesn't have the consciousness to deal with it. We have to look at him in the eye and say, like they said, a lot of the old, like black people say in the church, be still and know that you are not God. You need to be still. You know what I'm saying? Shut up. That's what Minister Ishmael said. You know, God let you get shot in the ear, letting you know you need to listen. You talk too damn much. You know what I'm saying? But we have our agenda, we have our worldview, we have our commitments. We must build upon them. I think the year of Baldwin was our way of sharing all of this. And it showed that method of going to the people and discussing these ideas in and through the people, through institutions of the people, is the most productive. We have a positive approach to the future. We are not anarchists and nihilists. Or better, we ain't Trotsky, I see. But I'll stop there.
Well, some of the really important things you mentioned, Doug, because I think there was a lot that we haven't fully articulated in this way before. And to the first part of your presentation, I was thinking of this idea that we are at a qualitatively different epoch than previous revolutionary times, and even beyond the anti-colonial movement. In a different moment now, when new theories that new theories need to be understood in order to understand movement of ideas today. I think that's very important for us to think about, because always the default at our times is to try and understand the world based on previous revolutionary thinkers and who saw the world in at revolutionary times. And therefore the distinction from the Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, and the anti-colonial movement, I think it's very important. It's an important idea for us to keep in mind as we understand this time. And also this idea that you're saying that more people today relate positively to the idea of a revolutionary transformation of society. I thought that's very important. And really, this shows also why the ruling class is hell bent on pushing ideas of pessimism and queer theory and postmodernism, all of which is an attack on human agency, which is supposed to tell us the exact opposite of that, and to comfort inaction, basically. But to sort of come to this whole idea of Du Bois as at the originary moment of a new world movement. I think
Yes, the thought, yes.
of a new world movement of thought. I think this is. I mean, I was thinking. I was listening to your talk at the library again yesterday, I think, and because you really have covered a lot of works of Du Bois and also how you are thinking about it. I think the essence is it's very important to say that what Du Bois, to understand the problems of today, we need to understand Du Bois in a very specific way, and to see that at what point in history, what point in history did he occupy, and what did he think in new terms? And this is why thinking of Du Bois, similar to how he saw Leonardo da Vinci, was also very important, because that's what we were looking at also, that Da Vinci really came before all of these philosophers of modernity. He was. I mean, I was also not sure about does he come after Descartes and all of the but he doesn't. He's probably the first figure of modernity. I don't know if you'd say that, but that's what I was thinking of. And that's why to see Du Bois as at the originary moment of a new movement of thought was very important. And this is how you talked about the emancipation of 4 million slaves almost as a moment of singularity. Yes, you're saying that, and also this is also how we've been talking about. So the entire year, I think, reading Baldwin and his understanding of the creation of whiteness, what he talks about as the unique part of the unique feature of American history being that America had their slaves on their shore, and so therefore this confrontation with the question of humanity, the full understanding of humanity, was something that was only possible here. And this is what Du Bois understood. This is the science that Du Bois began to understand. To understand humanity, to understand the full nature of humanity, which was not possible at the moment that Kant and Hegel and all of these philosophers of modernity are they're doing their science, they're doing their philosophy. So I mean, I wanted to bring that back because I think this is this is really exciting. I find it really exciting because we are really understanding Du Bois also in a new way, and the struggle for ideas for our time is also to really be precise about why Du Bois, because the fact that Du Bois is an important thinker, I think it's everyone, it's common knowledge at this point, but we are trying to really figure out why. And I think to get this question wrong is to get everything wrong. And yeah, I just wanted to sort of highlight that.
Well, I just wanted to add, I think Ethnic and Barkerson, and I'm just thinking through a lot of the stuff you said, Doc. But when you talked about gender theory and queer theory as a theory of everything, and
a unified theory, yes,
a unified theory of everything, and I wanted to juxtapose that notion of a unified theory of everything against a world movement of thought. Because I say it in part because I think there's sometimes I have a tendency to, I know I've brought this up many times before, but I have a tendency to almost want, it's like I want Du Bois to do certain things, which is almost like to do for us what many leftists want to get out of Marx, for example, which is Marxism very clearly is we are almost presenting a testable hypothesis, which they still frame it as a unified theory of everything, right? It's an attempt to draw from the European situation to explain all of human history. And I think this is in part something that I feel like we're continuing to work out. But I think sometimes I have a kind of impulse of I want Du Bois to do exactly the same thing for us. if that makes sense, which I don't think is exactly the right way to approach it. And in many ways, this idea of Du Bois as the initiator of a new world movement of thought, on the one hand, it considers the fact that there is such a thing as Du Boisian in science, which we are trying to work out. But also, it is not to say that Du Bois literally represents this kind of unified theory of everything in the way that many people would look to a Marx, for example. And I'm still trying to think through exactly the implications of that, because I do think part of the task, and I think you said this in your presentation or your lecture at the Free Library, but part of the task is to realize a Du Boisian science for this time. But it's also, in many ways, how I am starting to interpret it is that when you frame Du Bois as this initiator, this originator of the New World movement of thought, it is also to say that Du Bois makes it possible for people all around the world to discover in kind of the logic of their own societies what is a kind of theory and practice which will push them towards freedom and which will make freedom possible. And I don't know if that's, I don't know, I feel like I'm not entirely satisfied with even the way I said that, but I just wanted to say that because I feel like it's like, yeah, like what is even the work of philosophy in the way that we do it? And while you were talking, I feel like part of the way that I was like coming to terms with it is like almost like this work of philosophy. It's like whether it's here in the free school, whether it's in all of our public, events, the reading groups, so on and so forth. It's almost like to realize the air that we're all breathing, and it's like this air which is already around us and which is justifying human action and human thought, but which people may not necessarily be aware of as like that air which we're all breathing, or like the water which we're all swimming through, if you see it as like an ocean or whatever. And I don't know, I just feel like it's important to think like what is the work of philosophy in the first place, especially in this time. Yeah. And I just want to say one more thing about kind of Du Bois and his kind of method, which is interestingly, because we've been in the Bandung group, we've been reading the Philadelphia Negro, but we're moving towards Souls of Black Hole. And part of what's interesting is that on the one hand, you can say that Du Bois is a materialist in the sense that he's examining the actual lives and actions of human beings and the way that they live and the way that they work and where they are in society and all that stuff. But you can also say that Du Bois, it's almost like if you look at even Marxism as an attempt to invert this thing of like, oh, Marx and Engels were not satisfied with Hegel because they thought Hegel was too metaphysical, right? Idealistic. And they tried to flip it and be like, actually, no, we're ascending to the material, we're ascending to the concrete. I think part of what I feel like Du Bois does, which I may be wrong about, what I think Du Bois does is that he starts with the material life, but he, in order to ascend to the concrete, he ascends to almost like a world spirit, or he ascends to like also the artistic. And it's like his way of even grasping like the totality of social life and the totality of like world historical movement is through the artistic. And it's like, that's why does he start the Souls of Black Hole in the way that he does, as like almost like through allegory or through all of these metaphors? When it's like, are the metaphors abstract, or are the metaphors actually the most concrete way of explaining human phenomena? And so I feel like, I don't know, this is my attempt to kind of work out some parts of like even like how Du Bois approaches this. But I think it's I've always seen Du Bois in that sense of like a person who is trying to put together like I think it was in his words, like the actual living thoughts and deeds of men, of human beings. And I think, I don't know, this is in part like, I don't know, just how I'm processing this thing, but I don't know, I just thought it was important to kind of return to that idea of like a unified theory of everything versus a world movement thought, which is not so dogmatic or closed, I guess.
So I was thinking about the unified theory thing also. And first to point out that I think the idea of a unified theory is different from things being universal or generally shared. And I think that's what we see. Yeah, because when you say universal, I think in some ways, I forget where we got it, maybe from Elian Cobb or something we studied in science group. A thought that had stayed in my head is when you talk about something that's general or universal, sometimes more than the ways in which things are similar, they are articulated even better by the ways in which things are different, but still share some common essences. So I think that I say is the difference between something like queer theory or even string theory claiming to unify diverse and things that battle with each other, but you're trying to unify them rather than something universal which is shared and which can be the basis of a common understanding or epistemology. The other thing that I again related, I think I also wanted to bring back what talk you said about chronology in some ways not being a sufficient description, and a better description being this idea of a movement of world thought. And I think I have more questions than understanding about this, but the way I understand what you're saying also is that this idea of a chronology almost has like, okay, you're moving towards this definite thing, or like it has like almost an unbroken continual logic from the beginning to the end, whereas a movement of world thought open, like it's more like you're talking about what are the possibilities that come from seeing the world in a particular way. And yeah, I mean, even what Shambartha was bringing up, this idea that emancipation of 4 million slaves marks a new stage in modernity and puts on the table the demand for a new movement of world thought, because now it brings all of humanity into modernity for the first time, or like that's the beginning of something, of it becoming something that concerns all of human beings. So the agent of knowledge or the agent of history can no longer just be the white man. It's the human being in all its hues and so on. So it requires a new movement of world thought. And what Du Bois does, which is an extension on Kant, Hegel, and all of these people, is to say that it's not just the synthesis of the empirical with the metaphysical, but then you need a whole other dimension of art and music, or going beyond just the rational to understand or to know what the truth is. And then that brings me to what you started with, which is this idea that it's possible that we are not even in the same epoch Du Bois occupied today, where that epoch of the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, but also the anti-colonial struggles and this movement of world thought that Du Bois started. In some ways, we are in a qualitatively different stage or mode of ideological struggle from even that. And I wanted to first say why I think you say that, and then also put that on the table to discuss.
Can I ask a question? Did I say that?
That's
That
or maybe I misunderstood.
Well, let me just say, are you saying that I said that that we are in a different epoch than that which Du Bois occupied?
No, maybe
okay.
maybe what I mean to say is we are in a different epoch than the Russian Revolution, the Chinese
That's
Revolution.
what I'm saying.
Right.
They
And
yeah.
I think I'm drawing the conclusion that that epoch is also connected to Du Bois as and so things are not entirely clear to me about what, but maybe the difference between that epoch and this is what we have also been saying about the crisis of white epistemology and this like overwhelmingly global phenomenon of people just being able to look at a place like America, to look at white society and be able to see that it is anti-human, it is anti-love, it is anti-peace in some ways. But I also wanted to ask you to say a little more about what that.
The way I interpreted, because that was actually in some ways an important the question you asked, because the way I interpreted what you were saying, Doc, is that interestingly, Du Bois is of that historical time of the Russian Revolution, the fall of Reconstruction, the Russian Revolution, the Indian freedom struggle, the anti-colonial movement. But in some ways, Du Bois, even though he lived in that time, a lot of his thought actually has much more, completely meets this moment more. And then so in some ways, he's of the historical time, but his life's work has even more relevance for like the crisis of now. and yeah, because and then the other thing you picked up on the chronology thing is the way I interpreted the importance of not using the word chronology versus world movement of thought is that there can be multiple distinct movements of thought, world movements of thought, one that might expire or be completed while another one is rising. Because in some ways, the thing that I realized, like an assumption I had for a long time, which I think in free school we had this belief. I feel like we kind of always talked about the anti-colonial movement and the Black freedom struggle being part of one fabric of movement of thought. But in some ways, I feel like what's being presented is that actually the Russian Revolution and the anti-colonial movements was a very specific struggle, a really specific struggle against colonialism or European empire that became fulfilled. But then at the same time, with the emancipation of 4 million enslaved workers, that produces a completely new, distinct world movement that not only was ahead of the rest of the world, but now basically would help a country like China or help a country like India or help Africa today truly be freed. And yeah, because I feel like that's really different than the way we would have talked in the past with preschool. Like we would have said like, oh, we're trying to complete the anti-colonial struggle today. In some ways, the way that I see it differently would be that India, China, all these countries that are technically independent but not actually freed would need the contributions of the Black freedom struggle and Du Bois, for example, to help fully achieve modernity that isn't white and the conclusions of white modernity, which is a replacement of the human being rather than a freeing of the human being. And I don't know if I got that right, Doc. But yeah, the thing I wanted to highlight was actually the way you described. It's what everyone else has been talking about, but the way you described the significance of basically the emancipation of 4 million workers, which at that point was like the freeing of the most, emancipation of the most people and most workers in history. And specifically how you said that changed the definitions, that produced even new definitions, modern definitions of what democracy or humanity or peace could mean. And I thought that was kind of deep because or even the way that Du Bois as an originary of a new world movement of thought, saying that the contradiction of modernity, the problem of modernity is that of the color line. And color line not being what white people think race is, but actually the color line being a degradation of the human being that changes even the way you understand science or the meaning of life or the way employment should work, or jobs, or industry, or logics of development and stuff like that. I think that's important because, in some ways we're in a new epoch of humanity and what humanity must fight for and what humanity could actually mean in this time. And if you are like actually interested in not just like freedom, but even this idea of like human consciousness, like at an all-time high, being able to really fulfill the freeing of what humanity, or being a human being could mean, or what a human being deserves, or what humanity should mean, then like you would have to take the anti-slavery movement seriously as the originary of a world movement, like a world struggle. So like even, for example, in China, like Chinese people would, if they wanted to move forward, rather than seeing themselves as a fulfillment of we need more Marxism, Leninism, they would say we're at a point where we're alleviating poverty, but there's an unfulfilled universal question of humanity that we like will need to look, which we would need to look to like the Black struggle in America as kind of like helping fulfill what is a universal human problem. Like you could call that a problem of war, a problem of empire, but that is essentially like the same. It's the same. Like to say solving the universal problem of humanity or modernity is to say like we're solving also the problem of war. Okay, I know I'm talking a lot, and I know you wanted to add something, but I just wanted to add that I liked what Jeremiah was bringing up with Du Bois' science, because I feel like in some ways, Doc, you completed something that you added something important if we're going to talk about the substance of what Du Boisian science means, because I feel like more than method, Du Boisian science starts from understanding that Du Bois's starting point is the color line. And if your starting point of the color line, if you start with the color line as the problem of the 20th century, then that even changes your understanding of method or art as a method or art as philosophy. And like a concrete example is, rather than seeing people as a product of their conditions, you see ordinary people, something that might be even more important than just your conditions is your strivings. And that's something Du Bois, I feel like, only gets from his understanding of like the color line and taking seriously the like emancipation of 4 million enslaved proletariats on their own. Like, okay, the last thing I just wanted to add is that I guess another way I see it is like, the other way I kind of am applying what we're talking about here is, if you take America, Du Bois always says America is an experiment for humanity, right? Like he's always like, America is an experiment for humanity to learn from. Like it's the difference between seeing America as just like a bad place versus seeing America versus like, okay, because America, let's just take poverty in America. Are you seeing poverty? Does America have a problem with poverty because like we don't have enough industry? Like, one way of viewing poverty, let's say in India, is that India hasn't necessarily developed the industries enough to have enough resources, or that India still is in a neo-colonial relationship with the West, and that's why they don't have resources, and that's why people are still poor and they need to lift up. But in America, it's not a problem of not enough development. Poverty in America, this concrete material problem of poverty is actually more of a problem of why is poverty let to still exist? Like, who is still why is poverty still let by the people in America to exist in a society that does have enough resources? And that's, so rather than seeing it as a economic material problem, you see it as a human problem. Poverty is a human problem. And like, I think maybe I'm not explaining this good enough, but the reason why that's deep is because then you realize it's a universal human problem.
Can I ask a question? When you say the human problem, you're talking about a moral problem.
Yeah, it's a moral problem, which is actually why King is very advanced. Like if you take Martin Luther King serious, like actually Martin Luther King is pretty advanced, because that's what he says. He's like, poverty is not a problem of we don't have enough industry. Poverty or war is a moral problem. It's a problem that we let still exist. And that's also why I liked what you said, Doc, about like the same reason why we let poverty still exist, the same reason why like Black people were enslaved is also the same logic of why white modernity wants to now replace the human being with AI. Or why, for example, why is it that we have so much plastic surgery? Like, it's even like the definition of beauty, right? It's why, like the same like conclusion of white modernity that enslaved people and like goes to war is the same reason why like we're seeing even a place where like we want to replace human beings with AI, with like technology, why like women are like putting so many substances in their bodies to have bigger behinds and like change the way their face looks, the way you describe chemicals and toxins in our food. And I feel like in some ways, like this whole Du Bois as an originator of a world movement of thought is also the way we like see ourselves as even inheriting some of the things that King even advanced or said. The way he said, we're in a battle to go beyond the colony of time and enter the empire of eternity.
Right. Wow.
So, that's how I interpreted the presentation.
I just wanted to go back to what Emily started with, because that's something I'm still thinking about, this idea of a different epoch, and the epoch of revolutions and anti-colonial struggle, where apart from the fact that I do think there is a universal quality to Du Bois, I do think or at least beyond what I can understand after this. I do think he is a theorist or a philosopher for that time, particularly because it was the entry of more than half of humanity who had been kept from the project of modernity into modernity. And he uniquely, I think, fits that moment. And that's why also this idea that he was the originary of a new movement of world thought makes a lot of sense. And when I say that we have moved on to a different epoch, I don't mean to say that Du Bois becomes dispensable in any way, but in some ways, I feel like what characterizes the epoch now is almost like a crisis of whiteness or white civilization, which in fact I feel like had a lot to do with, white supremacy having stopped people from even acknowledging a figure like Du Bois and taking his or becoming part of this movement of what world thought that he had started, because he could never be put on par with all these European thinkers and so on. And Doc had said this at the library, and we talk about this a lot, where the only way you could see Du Bois was as a derivative of all these other thinkers, and the best you can say is he's like an American Marx or American Lenin or so on. So in some ways, I'm also saying that this new epoch, in some ways, was caused by you.
No.
Okay.
I'm just.
It's also basically if white supremacy is also a reason why this movement of world thought was not taken up sufficiently by the Western world or Western civilization. And I feel like it has pushed us to this new epoch, which is the crisis of white epistemology and crisis of white civilization. And I actually feel like, this is also, we've said this before, this is also why it makes so much sense that we say Baldwin becomes so important in this particular moment. This idea of whiteness as a moral choice. And then almost this existential situation that he holds up is that it's either whiteness or it's death as a society. So that's sort of how I see it. And there was something else. I forgot. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think this thing of chronology and like world movement is pretty interesting, where it seems like world movements, there's more like overlap or like openness than flexibility, whereas I feel like chronology is like pretty defined. And I still think it's important to have like located a revolutionary chronology for American history, but I feel like that's different to say like we know where we stand in the chronology of the present, because I don't think we do. And I also think that the comparison of like Du Bois to Da Vinci is also deep, because like Purva, what you were saying, that Du Bois was not recognized in his time. And basically there was something in that existing world movement of thought that prevented people from actually seeing it. And I think this thing of like Da Vinci as having done his science or produced his ideas in a time before actually many people were prepared. But then once they were ready, or once like time did pass, people did take it up. And I don't know, I just feel like what you were saying about properly like identifying or expanding like the human agent of historical process is like a really, really deep thing, because also I think like properly giving credit to Kant and Hegel and saying that they did locate something, like they were actually committed to freedom. But then what was it in like centering the European that then later people took to mean as white, which then like basically curtailed or limited the possibility of that project. And yeah, I think just today, this expansion or like this actual like universal sense, I like starting at or really like seeing the emancipation of 4 million like Black workers, I think also just brings us to like what actually today, like what we mean by the whole humanity struggle. Also, like where you were saying that in emancipation, you get to like new ideas of democracy, like a redefinition of like the actual human being, like those existential, like actually like philosophical questions of like, what is the world that we live in? Like, what are human beings capable of? Like, what do we choose to see? And I feel like in some ways, like Du Bois properly seeing that in that time and like doing his science, like leaving a record that is like why he is the originary of the new movement. And now I think it's up to like basically all of humanity to actually take it up. Because I was thinking of like when, I guess in World in Africa and Black Reconstruction, like he's basically talking about like the darker peoples of the world, like the worker, like black, brown, yellow, red. And I was like, what does he mean like by that? Like, what does that actually mean? And yeah, I feel like it was easier in some ways to take it as like, oh yes, like we're all one. And I feel like, yes, there is a universal aspect to that, but I think it's the question of where did it start, which is that like slavery, the plantation system, all of that literally like catapulted, I don't know, it was an essential part of like modern industrial capitalism and like a world system. And so we have to like go back there. Yeah, but I also just think like what you were saying about not wanting to like walk backwards into the future and actually like wanting to be conscious in this time and not conscious in like, a dogmatic way of saying like any idea from the past is sufficient to this time. Like that is sufficient. It gives me full consciousness. Like it's adequate. And that is enough to like chart the future. I feel like what you were saying was actually like a truly like revolutionary assessment of like how can we be conscious and actually like just number one, like our commitment to freedom, our commitment to truth. And like we don't need to go back, we don't need to rely on any of these things that like actually shackle us in the past. Like we have the courage and we have the capacity to actually embrace the new. And we can do that because also we're not alone. There's actually like more people than ever before, like more like human beings, more people who are like basically do have this striving.
Oh, can I?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to. I never really took a course and was assigned to read Du Bois, but I used to sit in the doctor's class for the Temple, and so I read not the first autobiography, but the second one. I read it 2 times, and the first thing I noticed was this triangle. He did the dissertation, he talked about slavery in the Caribbean. And that told me he must have at least known how to read French because all the sources were in French. Then I read about him studying in Europe. And I said, and then he makes you understand that he understood the history of thought and particularly Germany. It was interesting you bring it up. And then the ethnographic work, when he talks about leaving the North, he ends up in Tennessee teaching at elementary school. But on the way, you could tell he did ethnography, what they call it. That's why I know what the doctor means when you talk about the father of sociology. Like, when I studied ethnomusicology, and they were talking about this person, the father of ethnography. Du Bois was doing that in the early 1900s. And the way he would let you know that the people were not just subjects, things to just study, like objects. He would talk about how old they were, with occupation. Now, so I'm saying to myself, well, is he a historian or he's what is he? And then the way he spoke about the sorrow song. I thought he was a musician, but he was talking about in a socio-historical context. Let you know that musical traditions come out of historical experiences. So if you talk about, you don't necessarily, like he talked about, he interpreted songs, like sometimes I feel like I'm always a child, but sometimes I feel like I don't have a mother. And then if you look at it literally, maybe this person they took him away from his mother, but he's looking at, that could have been Africa. You could tell that. So I'm trying to figure out, sociologist, historian, polyglot, because even if he didn't speak French or German fluently, the fact that he identified sources in German to understand Hegel, you had no German. And to understand when you talk about Toussaint and the Haitian Revolution and the fact that they freed the slaves in Santo Domingo. You know, so I'm saying to myself, now I never took the course, course, and and dealing with this issue of historiography, the way I see him, for a researcher, history has a function or looking at what people said about what happened in the past is important, but you have to look at it as being cyclical more. You know, something happened here because you could, I know people used to say, oh, this is a modern day plantation. So what they're really saying is, yeah, this, you said it happened here, but when I was reading about Bruce, they're doing the same thing down the street. You know, so I think as scholars, when you start looking at change, I think I know what you mean about it's not something progressive change is definitely going to happen, but where did it reverse? You know, and then it gets into K through 12 and undergraduate studies. I'm bringing this up because, see, I forgot to tell you, I'm teaching ESL at a charter school. All students are from Egypt, Pakistan, what have you. And it's interesting, they had this thing about cultural relevant pedagogy, and all teachers having a problem because because when Ramadan was on its way and they were trying to teach about Christianity, one student said, oh, that's like Ramadan. That's had nothing to do with Ramadan. I took the teacher aside. He's talking about the fasting. Yeah, but I said, no, do you understand what he was saying? I said, no, what you need to do is, you say you practicing culturally relevant. If he's from the Middle East, that's when they fast. You know, and then well, he didn't know what I meant. I said, no, you didn't. You should have just said, look, that's when they don't eat. So if you deal with the K through 12 and the ELL situation, and it's all see what we're doing. Everything's interconnected today, and the question is, when you prepare, like they always tell students with ESL, okay, you just go off the boat, you can't speak English, and they stick you in fifth grade, and then they get my IEP and say, well, he has cognitive deficiency. I said, you ever think that Robert's linguistic?
Right.
Oh yeah, I know. I think that he can't think. There was a little boy who was from Haiti. He's in the seventh grade. Said he wanted me to speak, and I had to use the French I learned in Africa. And I said, qu'est-ce qui passe? And he was telling me in French, in his Creole French, he said he keeps looking at me like I'm stupid, but I'm not. Je ne suis fou pas. You know, and then I was telling the teacher, I said, well, you know, he understands syntax and grammar in his native language, and he kept getting mixed up with the E and the I. Because in French, the I, you say E, and then the E, you have to say E, or depending on, and I was explaining that, but that has nothing to do with it. I said, now I see what's going on with the K through 12 nonsense. You know, anytime you as this uppity, denigrating educator, that this person, because he has an accent when he speaks, you feel he has a cognitive deficiency. And I'm just bringing that up because, see, this problem in academia on the graduate level, see, the roots of it is in K through 12. Yeah, and see, I think that those of us, some of us, we start to get it, once we get the master's degree, we kind of forget about the little people, the children. But I would strongly invest anyone, sometimes it gets into community work, still tutoring, K through 12, developing cognition, and most of all, giving them, encouraging them, making them feel like they're somebody. You're not a loser because you have an accent. Or you said E instead of E, you know. And I just wanted to relate the Du Boisian legacy for me when it came to still dealing with young people is to listen. See, Du Bois, that think about ethnography, you got to observe and and then for him to even address the issue of how somebody thinks, meaning he had to listen to what they said. So I think what really distinguishes him from that European style is he did what I call applied epistemology.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he like applied anthropology, all these fancy words. He made it simple, brought it down, and I do that myself. You know, when I teach salsa, now it's not written, oral tradition, so I have to start with the performance, and then I teach the students how do you write this rhythm down where you can remember what you played. So he he's literate, making himself literate. See, the whole thing about literacy is, can I associate something written with something with sound? It gets into linguistics. Yeah, so I was, because a lot of times people were born, well, what does Du Bois have to do with today? Well, if you really know all the dimensions of Du Bois, the importance of constantly reading and reinterpreting written history, and then you have behavior in real time, what people are actually doing now, and he indirectly, we can say, if not explicit, implicit, looking into the future, because he's actually giving you the tools to develop a new pedagogy. That's what he's doing. I didn't want to rattle off like that, but I don't get a chance to, especially the people I deal with, they're not too bright. No, the K through 12, they're going with the wind. And then even on the graduate level, what the doctor was going through there, they actually tried to look at, well, that has nothing to do with Afrocentricity. How could you say that Du Bois is everything? His work on Africa, that was his last days he was in Africa. He was very Afrocentric. It's irrelevant. That's an act of lunacy.
Well, I wanted to add, well, also to what you were saying about art and music, because I think this is something I'm trying to like work out in my head. But I think part of what I'm trying to like grasp from Du Bois is on the one hand, art is a kind of abstraction, which I think we've talked about before, like a few weeks ago. But simultaneously, art is the concretization. So it's like both an abstraction, but also a concretization, if that makes sense. And it's like, whether it's Souls of Black Folk or even the end of Du Bois's book, The World in Africa, why does he end with the metaphor of Andromeda and Perseus, right? Yeah, like these like almost Greek metaphors, Greek myth. And it's that on the one hand, it's a way of abstracting a certain basically like world historic phenomenon, but it's, I think part of how I'm starting to understand it is that the artistic is the way that all kinds of people best grasp ideas and also enact ideas. Like basically like art becomes even its own form of social, like what shapes social life and how people behave and how they organize and what moves them. Because I think it's like, even like if you compare a work like Philadelphia Negro to Souls of Black Folk, another example is like, what is more, as a reader, what is more compelling to you? Is it like, which is not, I'm not like saying like one is necessarily better, but I think you said this, but that Souls is a more complete work, right? Which I think builds on a lot of the observations that Du Bois makes in the Philadelphia Negro and other places, but that what is more compelling to you as a reader? Is it reading basically Du Bois listing off different people that he interviewed and different kinds of like statistics and all that stuff? Or is it like Du Bois synthesizing that and then presenting you with the story of like Josie in one of the chapters in Souls of Black Folk, which is basically an artistic way of depicting the actual struggles and strivings of especially Black children and, you know, of the South and all that stuff. And I feel like, I don't know, this is part of what I'm just trying to make sense of, which is why, like, when you brought up the artistic and the imaginary and as how to complete even what science is trying to do, is that, like, when you brought this up in your presentation, in your lecture, is that the artistic is simultaneously an abstraction of certain things, but it's also the way that you concretize like ideas, you concretize like social phenomenon, you concretize human complexity, and you make it something which everyone can understand and which everyone can kind of relate to and can use to even better understand their own lives and what motivates them and what drives them and what is their moral imperative. So I just wanted to put that also. And I think to also go back to the conversation about like history, chronology, world movement, I think like, I feel like in Russian in Black Reconstruction, Du Bois, I think this is what he says. He kind of makes the argument that it's the emancipation of 4 million Black slaves or enslaved proletarians, which makes possible the Russian Revolution and the world anti-colonial movement. But it's that you can also, this is what you guys are saying, but it's on the one hand, you can look at, let's say, the world communist movement and the world anti-colonial struggle as an attempt to resolve what were up until then certain unresolved questions of a certain epoch, right? Which is the epoch of Europe, like the epoch of Europe, for example. But on the other hand, Du Bois is that bridge between that attempt to resolve certain questions of a certain epoch and then what comes after, the epoch which comes after, which is why I think people, this is also why I think people get Du Bois completely wrong when you look at even works like Russian America. Because people will say like, oh, Du Bois was agreeing with Marxism and Du Bois basically became a Marxist, when actually to me, what stands out with even a work like Russian America is that Du Bois sees possibilities in whether it's the Russian Revolution or the world anti-colonial struggles, which even the leaders of those movements did not themselves he sees possibilities in what the Russian Revolution was doing and what the Chinese Revolution was doing, which I think even the revolutionaries of those revolutions did not fully realize in themselves. And I think this is also what bridges, like how Du Bois acts as the bridge between that epoch and then the new epoch, which is that it's like, yeah, like the world anti-colonial struggle does usher in new possibilities for human freedom. But it's like, the point is, like, what is it that comes afterwards? What is it that comes afterwards in this new epoch? And I think Du Bois is that bridge between, like, what was an attempt to resolve certain questions, but then open up new questions of humanity.
Can I just ask a brief? So would you say that Du Bois at that moment, at that intersection, recognized, consciously so, that a new movement of world thought was necessary? It seems like it to me. I know Fatih is talking about his various biographies. I think that the second one, Dusk of Dawn.
Yes, yeah.
You know, where he talks about empire and science, science and empire, another way, knowledge and empire, where he seems to be pushing the bounds.
Yeah, could I add something? I think this is why it's important not to just even stop at Du Bois. If you look at Catherine Dunham, which is interesting, okay, depending on what you read, okay, she studied anthropologist under the wing of Herskovitz, who was supposedly a specialist in Afro-Brazilian music. So some type of way she gets a grant, she goes to Caribbean, they think that she probably has been westernized and she knows what she's supposed to do. So she goes, and the idea is to do field research on dance. And so she did ethnography in Jamaica, Haiti, and then there was another island. Whatever it was, her idea was collect dances to show the African connection. In other words, she knew that a lot of the slaves first came to the Caribbean. She wanted to see how did the slaves in the French colonies, the Spanish colonies, the French colonies, and then she ended up becoming a priestess, going through initiation and buying a house in Haiti, and she spoke French very well. See, this is when we start looking at African American scholars, there's a general pattern of being a polyglot. And see, they're not called linguists, but they learn how to talk to the people. And then she is well documented. Getting into performed history. And she particularly drew on the ritual dances. She didn't go to the Port-au-Prince and do research on the ballroom dances. She wanted to know. And then a lot of her choreographic moves and her ballet, when she brought it back to America, that hip movement, she said was Congolese. Because, ballet, everything's straight, hip. And that was a scandal because her dancers were using, and then they had this feathery dress, looked like Josephine Baker, with a wiggle in the middle part. And they thought that was ostentatious and lascivious, what have you. And she showed that that's part of blackness, is moving that hip. If you're not copulating, or you're not emulating, what have you. Right. And what happened was they got mad with her. She wouldn't turn in the field recordings. She wouldn't give them, because she got the honorary doctorate, but she didn't get the piece of paper because they said she forfeited. We gave you a grant to go do research, but she took that initiation seriously. You do not disclose certain things as a priest or priestess. Again, now most people think about her in stormy weather, early days with Lena Horne, but when you read Catherine's entire biography, that's why Zora Neale Hurston, Catherine Du Bois, if you get to see all, now Zora did the same thing. They have identified in first, oh, she was a folklorist, but she wrote plays. She actress. It's the idea of performing the research and then recycling it into a narrative style. Because all Catherine's dance compositions had a storyline. She had one called Shango from Jamaica. That's what it was called. Now, if you didn't know about Shango, most people associate with Cuba, but she was showing you this insular connection with the African, the Juba she talks about, and she calls it Belay, which is a Creole version of Bel Air, like Martinique, the French-speaking islands. So she was showing how the same dance steps were in the different colonies. That was her way, in terms of methodology. You can actually trace the origin of these Africans through dance steps. Even though they speak French here, speak English, Dutch, and she's downplayed. And then she opened up a school in East St. Louis. Yeah, I don't want to go on, but in getting into this idea of the connection between art as something that allows you to basically almost redefine, retell the narrative, create a new narrative through art. Well, they did it. So imagine if they had all collaborated.
Go ahead, Shanti.
Well, I was thinking about this question of art and about how it represents something that is concrete and abstract at the same time. And I don't think like last couple of weeks ago when we talked about this, I completely understood. But I've been trying to understand it through like the works of Du Bois, and I come to his work Dark Princes, which he wrote in 1928. And I think that is a work of art through which he's trying to get across the very point that we're talking about, which is this, which is the recognition of the black man and the black freedom movement in a kind of all humanity struggle or a movement of world thought. I think that is Du Bois' acknowledgement that it is necessary for anything to be an all humanity struggle, and for the origin of a world movement of thought in that time requires the presence of requires an understanding of Black America and about how, and I think that this did feature, now that I think about it, in a lot of his works. The emancipation of 4 million slaves is sort of underlying a lot of his art as well as his theoretical discourse. Because I think I was rereading Of the Ruling of Men recently, and what you said about the redefining of things like democracy and freedom after the emancipation of 4 million slaves, it really reminded me of that essay, because in that essay, Du Bois is talking about the Industrial Revolution and about how in that moment there are these two, there's a clash between two epochs almost. There's a clash between two epochs where one he calls anachronistic and the other inevitable. You know, the kind of movement into the future was inevitable, you know, through the Industrial Revolution. But he also sort of says that that is a moment where the world had the opportunity to actually unite around the basis of the fact that you have all these workers, including the black worker, but what kept them behind was this color line, right? And he I think if I could read out just a small little part of this essay, he says that like the 14th and the 15th Amendments were efforts at a new democracy, and about how the establishment of the color line actually held people back, held an entire world of thought back. That was a right moment for the world to actually come into something new. And I think he says here that after Reconstruction, after failure of Reconstruction, he says that this led to renewed efforts on the part of white European workers to understand and apply their political power to its reform through democratic control. Whether known as communism or socialism or whatnot, these efforts are neither new nor strange nor terrible, but world old and seeking an absolutely justifiable human ideal. The only ideal that can be sought, the direction of individual action in industry so as to secure the greatest good of all. Marxism was one method of accomplishing this, and its panacea was the doing away with private property in machines and materials. Two mighty attacks were made on this proposal. One was an attack on the fundamental democratic foundation. Modern European white industry does not even theoretically seek the good of all, but simply of all Europeans. The attack was virtually unanswered. Indeed, some socialists openly excluded Negroes and Asiatics from their scheme. From this, it was easy to drift into that form of syndicalism which asks socialism for the skilled laborer only and leaves the common laborer in his bond. So I think that he is trying to say that that the emancipation of 4 million slaves was an important thing that was not considered in this redefining of democracy after you know the Industrial Revolution and the failure of Black Reconstruction. And so I think that he took it upon himself to say that this is where it begins. We have to start something in this moment. And this is interesting because he wrote this in 1920, which is 3 years after the Soviet Revolution. So he is sort of thinking about what this new democracy is going to mean. And I come back to this essay a lot because I think I get my definition of democracy from this essay where he says that democracy is a method of realizing the broadest measure of justice to all human beings. I think that's what we're trying to sort of figure out in today's time, what that means. And I think that he is right. Considering the human ideal is essential, considering the human project, as you said, is essential for that to live.
I'd like to go back to a portion of the discussion where we consider Du Bois as the father of a movement of world thought, which is universal. First, in that it allows you to get at the heart and core of what the human being is that no other kind of thought has been able to do thus far. And then it is universal in that it puts the future into the people's hands as broadly and as deeply as possible. So I guess to do that, I'll read a very short quote from Baldwin, actually, which I think grasps the origin of this thought that makes it possible. Just real quick, it's in the Fire Next Time. Baldwin, of course, carries forward this thought that Du Bois sets in motion. He says, this past, the Negro's past, of rope, fire, torture, castration, infanticide, rape, death, and humiliation, fear by day and night, fear as deep as the marrow of the bone, doubt that he was worthy of life, since everyone around him denied it. This kind of condition in which the Black man and woman of America had to probe deep into what it meant to be a human being for themselves and to look at other human beings. Fortunately, no one in human history was put into this kind of position And at the same time, being in this position, that depth of understanding, I think, is unmatched and necessary in this time and place to grasp at the human being of the entire world. I think it is no coincidence that Black people have identified with the struggles for freedom of all people across the world at all times and places. I think it comes from this kind of depth of understanding. And then just dot 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 in the quote, that man who is forced each day to snatch his manhood, his identity, out of the fire of human cruelty that rages to destroy it, knows if he survives this effort, and even if he does not survive it, something about himself and human life that no school on earth and indeed no church can teach. This I think, even among many things, articulates that kind of universality in the struggle for freedom that is necessary to understand, because this is, I mean, Baldwin is a genius for being able to articulate it this way. But he's talking about something that every man and woman of his time, and I think many men and women of this day right now, have to contend with, even to this day. And that kind of democratic capacity of Black people, and this democratic mandate of every man, woman, and child to decide for themselves who they must be and what the future will become, what they're going to do about this terrible, grave injustice. I think no other kind of struggle has been forced to contend with that, because no people have had to deal with what Baldwin is talking about. And so I view the Black thought as the only kind of thought that can deal with the problems of this time in this full capacity to give us a chance at a future.
What you were saying also reminded me of something that talk you started with when you were talking about Fatih, is that this idea that if you want knowledge, you have to struggle for it rather than, expecting to go to somebody and it be given to you, right? And what you're describing about what Baldwin says as a Black man, a lot of what you knew about yourself, or you knew even about this society which was trying to kill you, you had to struggle for. You had to basically create knowledge out of that ruthless experience of being attacked day after day after day. And that something clicked for me, because even what you were saying about Jeremiah and Doc, what you were saying about postmodernism and all of that, that's what it's attacking. This idea that you have to struggle to know, or you can struggle and get to know yourself and the world, where I feel like since the advent of all of these postmodern ideas, this idea that truth is nothing and everything is everything, that sort of obscuring of everything that you can hold on to and like not drown. What it really does is it has like established a culture of profound discomfort with having to make choices on day-to-day basis, or having to struggle for anything. You just want to be handed, truths, and you with ready-made meanings attached to them that come from empirical evidence of, I don't know, gender, sexuality, or whatever. And then you want to receive them, and then you don't want to ever have to think about making a choice about whether you believe or not believe or whatever. And I don't know if this is making sense. I mean,
Like the unified theory is basically presented to you like ready-made, like it's done. Whereas I think world movement of thought compels you to actually participate. And I think actually identifying that there is such a thing as a world movement of thought, like for the moment, like for the time, is important, because I feel like it even like conditions what we think or how we operate in the ideological struggle. Because we identify the ideological struggle as basically a democratic struggle of the people actually like striving, like basically this human striving, and that has to be in opposition with like this white epistemology that is anti-struggle and is also like in decline. Because part of what I was also struck by was like how optimistic like your opening remarks were, and how like in some ways it's jarring, because in the midst of like this society or like all of the pessimistic currents that are like basically like proliferated, that tell you like, oh, like actually this is the end of the world, like this is the end of history, and the decline of European thought, or like the decline of like progressive, liberal, like postmodern queer thought is an attack on like any concept of the future.
Yes.
And I feel like why do we have to subscribe to that? And I feel like this thing of like, the ideological struggle and actually identifying like, no, I want to be part of the world movement of thought. I want to be part of the all humanity struggle. And that involves the struggle of ideas, but also like identifying what are actually like actual ideas that human beings participate in versus like just objects or just like something that is handed basically by the ruling class to like create the counter revolution. Okay, Todd, Michelle, Bella, Bambala, they all say good morning. Michelle said Florence Price composed beautiful music. And Bambala says, yes, Doc, a lack of moral grounding is obvious. Yeah, it's very frustrating. I think this was about Trump walking backwards into the future. And then Michelle says, the artist explores inner worlds as well as outer worlds in order to produce images that portray both. Huge technological changes and transfer of wealth in order to its tycoons were part of Du Bois' moment, as well as Jim Crow's view. And then, I don't know the context of this comment, but Bambala said, LOL, the bourgeois were nonchalantly sipping tea and saying, you don't say. Yes, Doc, some philosophy is like trying to catch a fly with chopsticks in the dark. And then Bambala says, I wonder if reactionaryism is a word. And then also talking about moral poverty. And then there is a discussion in the comments where Hotline said, I was watching a few lives back, and the way this group ousted the black young woman and the black young man for guarding black culture was so disappointed.
Say that again. I didn't.
They were disappointed that we ousted people, but then I say this to say I'm glad to see more black faces at free school, especially while talking about King today. And then, but then BK and M Sparks were sort of trying to provide context, I think, to what that conversation actually was. The disagreement originated with the pure expression of black culture. They were not ousted. There are two different definitions of black culture, and the argument was centered around black music specifically. Like I said, was that the time they got up and walked out? I don't catch the argument.
It was when there was the debate about hip hop.
Yeah, no, I want to come back to that. That's because a lot of, what they're saying is based on the way they perceive free school and what free school is doing.
Right.
Free school does not mean just free discussion of anything and everything, but let's come back to that.
Or you don't pay.
Yeah, well, you definitely don't pay.
Yeah. I would like to just comment on the.
Wait, Fatih, let her finish the comments first. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so BK said, there is a disagreement with non-black people critiquing black culture and whether that or not that's permissible. iManifesto says, Du Bois was a master at observing and connecting dots. And Bambala said, I think this was about what you were saying, Fatih, but says, yes, you have to look eye to eye and listen. You have to actually hear the meaning. And said, this reminds me of the book Tell My Horse by Zora Neale Hurston, which then you mentioned Zora Neale Hurston. And then they said, man, I love Zora's books. And then Yul Adama says, in society, many times, the people who are being tricked will go along with the trick if they think it's being done by somebody else, until it's shown to them that they're the ones who are getting tricked. And then why civil rights ended up working is because Europeans aren't for all Europeans, just for a nepotistic set of elites. Question mark. I'm not sure what this is. Maybe. And then Michelle wanted to know what book I think Shantanu was reading from. Is it Darkwater?
Yeah.
Darkwater.
Yeah, it's Darkwater. Voices from Within the Veil by Du Bois. And then Kamala says, the 3 stages of wisdom are thinker, knower, doer. And then there are a lot of emotions.
I think if I could just see, there is in the work that we do and the work that must be done, there are all kinds of currents and cross currents. There are all kinds of many levels of development. Of course, we do this all the time. We are great beneficiaries of this collective discussion, but it's a commitment. This is not, something that the faint of heart or the uncommitted would do. And we want everyone to come to free school and to participate. But participation carries with it responsibility and even respect. And we talked about queer theory or queer activists. This is a specific category of thought and activism. It is not revolutionary, it is not progressive, it is in its essence counter-revolutionary. Well, to claim that, to say, and it requires the intervention of the ruling elite in ways that we're still trying to discover into the mental, psychological, and social processes of young people. Yeah. When Fatih talks about pedagogy, from K to 12, let's do from K to 1 or 2. The capturing of the mind and then to manipulate it. This is what we're faced with. That's what I would say. Don't, to the person that wrote that, don't rush to any conclusions without some empirical evidence about the life world of the free school. And yes, we are all happy to see more black faces, but there ain't more black faces because free school don't want them. There are issues, ideological and personal, that we have to confront among black youth. I talk to my friend Jerry all the time at black colleges where we could assume that the education and the pedagogy was for freedom at one time. You can't assume that now. You know what I'm saying? So, be careful in how you characterize something that you don't have empirical evidence or knowledge of. You know what I'm saying? And the other thing is the question of blackness.
Right.
This is huge. And what is black? And what is the struggle for black freedom? And this is why I think if people understand what Du Bois was about, what Baldwin was about, I guess you could say superficial, any reading of Baldwin is the human and like Du Bois said, I will use my own group to put science into sociology. But his own group was not the end game. His own group was part of a larger scientific or movement of human thought. But, we could get back into that. And I don't mean to be combative, but only to say, to understand something, you have to observe it, study it, do an ethnography of it, and not rush to conclusion. But Jerry, would you just on the question? We went to the same black college.
Gil Skyhern was a very dear friend of mine, and we're not producing that anymore. We don't produce a Marion Barry anymore, who was so down with the people that it was his undoing ultimately. He did his own wet work. He was a chemistry major. But he
at Fisk University.
Affirmative. And he was in the first wave of those lunch counter sittings. Richard Hatcher in Gary it came out of the movement. My work was on the impact of black mayors in the urban transition of the 1980s. And those guys came from the movement. But now our black politicians are coming from the machine, e.g. our mayor. And so that one of the hallmarks of the leadership under which we came up was that none of them were elected officials and none of them were affluent. Now our elected officials are very affluent. And we don't have to go to Washington, D.C. We can just see it down here in City Council, where they have push jobs and they get paid irrespective of the results of the people. I mean, this classic thing with this arena debacle was a slap in the face, a second slap in the face after the rabble could not be roused to come out for Senator Harris. And then the second blow was, and I told Tony that this thing was a fait accompli, that there's no way that this arena is going to be stopped. This thing was signed, sealed, and delivered. And it showed how the tail was wagging the dog, because the decision was made in Maryland between a local billionaire and what I call a carpetbagger billionaire with the NBA commissioner. So that whereas we faced a hole in the ground for the next 3 years, they did what should, if you're going to have a sports arena, we have a place in South Philly that was perfect for it. But these carpetbagger billionaires, they wanted it where they wanted it. And they led the black misleadership class politicians down the primrose path to think that their rubber stamping the proposal was the done deal. But you found a group of committed grassroots. I mean, they were carrying people out of there, arresting them. Tony and I were listening on the phone as the deal went down, and Council President Kenyatta Johnson said, "Well, we're going to have this vote today," because it was consistent with the timetable of the carpetbaggers. If they had not had the decision in the last meeting in council, well, then the whole timetable would have been thrown off. So irrespective of the fact that people were coming in these public speaking things and giving substantial reasons that this thing should not be put in Center City, they'd be like, yeah, we've done our due diligence, and now we're going to have this vote today. Don't matter. Come on, we're going to stay here all day until we do it. But what it exposed was they're being duped in the same way that Zelensky is being duped, was duped by the West. The Black Misleadership Council was duped by the carpetbagger billionaires and the local billionaire Comcast Roberts. Who's the local billionaire? That was the Comcast guy Roberts. But it was a victory for the people that showed the bankruptcy of the Black Misleadership class. And what we have here is the gestation of that new leadership. I'm assuming nobody here is affluent and nobody here is an elected official. And these are the hallmarks of what we need. I mean, Jesus was not born in Rome. Jesus was born in obscurity and in poverty. And, that's where the new emerging in the dawning of a new epoch, the new thinking will come. And I'm just blown away. Tony always brags about you folks. And I'm just blown away by the things Emily, Jerry, Perda are saying. And Brother Fatih, my brother. My brother.
I'm trying not to be a troublemaker. Yeah, trying.
But I mean, this is where it's at. He's always telling me that. And I mean, I always follow his lead. But Tony and I talk about this all the time. And coming from Lincoln University, where we came from, during the Vietnam War era, we would sit up all night talking about the issues of the day and not how cute we are or how cute we're going to be or how we're going to get paid and maximize our marketability in the labor force. A reasonable concern, but it can't be the driving force. It's a reasonable concern, but it can't be the driving force. I mean, Dr. King was not rich. Dr. King was not old. And neither was Malcolm. That's the other thing. Crosby, Stills, and I don't know if you know Crosby, Stills, Nash. They only have a song, Find the Cost of Freedom, where? Buried in the ground. Mother Earth will swallow you. Lay your body down. And you see, that's how we got here. But we don't have any politicians now, black politicians, who are willing to lay their body down or eschew their cush life to come back to us. They have jettisoned us, especially the impoverished, especially, poverty, a social imposition, not, a neoliberal thought, a matter of bad decisions and irresponsibility. Come on, man. Bad decisions. Our president, bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, and he got reelected twice. So it can't be about bad decisions. It can't be about choice. It's social imposition, and Dr. King, a sociologist, understood that. Du Bois, a sociologist, understood that. And that's what we used to understand at Lincoln. But now there's been a shift. And what's coming out of the HBCUs now, they want to let you wear cornrows. They're getting you corporate ready. They're getting ready. They're training you to embrace neoliberalism. This guy is persona non grata in those circles. So he started his own school. And he has his own acolytes. But I don't insult anybody by saying that, because I'm one. long term one. Because of the authenticity. And I tell you, he ain't rich. And ain't nobody gonna elect him nothing. But these are the hallmarks of what we need today. Stevie said love is in need of love today, but we're also in need of a principled leadership. And a revolutionary leader has to be able to walk away from the money. And again, that's another hallmark of Professor Montero's authenticity. He can't be bought. So, and at Lincoln, Tony has preceded me in North Philly at Central High School and Lincoln University. We met at Temple University in September of 1982. But I was in the last of the people coming out of HBCUs with this kind of a worldview. And now the worldview of the Black leadership class, of the privileged Blacks, I find it shameful, if not insulting, given what had to happen for you to be raised up like this. And now you jettison especially the poor. So that whereas I embrace Lincoln, I've been to other universities, but Lincoln is still my alma mater. I'm ashamed and saddened by what is being produced there. And I'm gonna say it, at Hampton, at Howard. You understand? And I have dear friends and family from those places, but I can't talk like this with them. I got to talk about the Eagles and the Phillies. And
That's your question. You and I discuss this often. We have a difference of perspective. Like Nuri said, I was very optimistic, but you feel that the Black struggle, and this is something that came up, I think I mentioned it to you. There's a reading group called the Bandung Reading Group. They're reading the Philadelphia Negro. And, you challenge whether or not there is a Black community, whether or not the Black community has the capacity to do what it did in the past. And so could you elaborate upon that?
I relate it back to Barry Obama. When he came in, all of a sudden, Black people are for war. When he came in, it was cool that he killed Gaddafi. When he came in, he could do what the feminists wanted. He could do what the gays wanted. But when he comes to the Black people, it's like stop moaning and take off your bedroom slippers and get out there. The king of the drones. And we thought it was cool because he sang a little Al Green in church. But that represented to me the nadir of where Black people have come. And what Brother Fati was saying about what was happening in the 12th decade, the lower high school, it's tragic. I'm a student also of the great architect Buckminster Fuller, and he talks about how education is now an ignorance factor. The children go in brilliant, and they come out, ignoramuses. I've worked with young people in trouble with the law ever since I was a young person, and what's eerie is that over 3 generations of young people, the rationales for their perpetrations are eerily the same. But the world in which they live has changed profoundly so that they are lagging farther and farther behind. And they have been cut off by the Blackness leadership. All they got for is some advice. Not no programs, not no leadership, not no jobs, just advice. And who do we follow now? Jay-Z and Beyonce. And what is their and LeBron James? I go to LeBron James for my political, leadership. No, he's a basketball player, man. And he's an affluent basketball player. And you know what their advice is? Kids, follow your dream. Not study, not work hard, but follow your dream. Come on, man. You don't have to read, especially you folks with these texts. You don't have to spell. You don't have to think. I mean, Fati, I feel bad for you, man, because I know that you don't have many audiences where you can talk like you. So you said it.
Oh, I don't. Well, they think I'm delusional.
Yes, sir, brother. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
No, well, see, you understand, by me dealing with the ones they don't want, most like I said, they don't want the Haitians, they don't want the Egyptians, they don't want the Pakistanis. They always tell me, oh, Mr. Rasul, we don't know what to do with him. You know him better than anybody else.
Yes, sir.
So they let me do pull-outs.
Yes, sir.
That's when I treat, like when I had this one boy from Egypt and we were talking, and the book was called something, it was the 13th century England. And I said, now why would they pick a novel like that? So what we did was, we talked about similarities between Egyptian culture and 13th century. So we put on a reconstruction of 13th century medieval music. And if you know anything about in the university and the academy, they call it historical reconstruction, historical this and the other. So they'll play music from Renaissance. It'll be like reenactment. So once through the Egyptian, we put it on. Then he said, "Oh, that sounds like Egyptian music." Then I told him, "Put on the Egyptian music." Then he said something about Ra music from North Africa. He said, "Oh, Professor, you know about Ra?" I said, "I heard about it." He said, "Oh, this is the Ra song. I think it was a song called Aisha." And then so basically here's where he was teaching me something. And he said because that he heard the whining sound on the vocal and the repetitive cyclical rhythmic pattern, that's why he said the Egyptian music sound like the other. Now what the question is, here he has cultural literacy. See what their problem is, so busy assimilating. See, ESL today is basically a sophisticated way of immediately assimilating the student. They even want you to get rid of the accent.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
See,
sir.
before the old years of ESL, you get off the boat, as long as you can say, "Hello, I called doctor," fine, to make the accent. No, now they want you to say, "No, you don't say that way." They want you to whine like that.
I would like to say one final.
And they want you to tell their jokes. Oh, he's pulling my leg. Students say, "Well, why would he pull my leg?" Yeah, so
I would like to say one final thing about my pessimism with the Black community and its potential for vanguard in this emerging epoch. You want to see and now I'm talking about the educated ones. You want to see them spin out of control? Say something good about Vladimir Putin. Say that the West started the war in Ukraine. You know, the Blackness leadership class embraces Israel. We have a mayor who wraps herself in the Israeli flag. You see, it's tragic. You know, the Russophobia and the Sinophobia, that disqualifies them now because this is a multifocal world. The idea of an exceptional nation, the idea of full spectrum military dominance, that's gone with the wind, Brother Foxy. It's gone with the wind. But that is the sine qua non of the black bourgeoisie's foreign policy. See, so I can't talk about anything but the Eagles. You know, we're over the moon now because the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Well, quite frankly, so I'm an Eagles fan. Quite frankly. You know, and I was delighted. But that's not where it ends for me. You know, I like to be liked. You know, he don't care. You know, but I talk about the Eagles. You know, I listen to the sports so I can have something to say when I'm not listening to democracy. To talking freedom or just Napolitano and all that. But if you want to see why the Blackness leadership class is disqualified, look at their geopolitics. They are profoundly reactionary, profoundly so. And the problem is me and him, not their Russophobia and their Sinophobia that stops them from realizing I'll use the term, the new world order that is emerging. You know, so hence my pessimism. No, man, that ship has sailed. You know, when we were coming up, Black people were taken seriously for their intellectual insights and their philosophical insights and their political leadership. Now we're only taken seriously if we want to bust a rhyme, bust a rap, or shoot a basketball or run a football. Our political leaders aren't taken seriously. That's why the decision about that arena didn't involve them. Man, we don't take you serious. You're puppets. We're pulling your strings. You can't run unless you get the money from us. So no, man, they're disqualified. This group is more qualified. Brother Jerry.
Do you see a different future between the Blackness leadership class and the Black community? Because that's because I feel like you're describing a lot of the Blackness leadership class.
Well,
but do you think that there's a divergence between?
Well, there clearly is, but see, there is no rudder. There used to be a rudder. They have been jettisoned and cast adrift because they're not learning anything in the schools. You know, they're not learning an orientation that will allow them to embrace what Professor Montero is talking about. They will look at him with a jaundiced eye. Yes. And you know, they will embrace Al Sharpton.
Tell them about what they did to me on URT.
WRD, I call it the haven for the Blackness leadership class in Philadelphia because they can go on there and spout their reactionary positions and not be challenged. You know, but they have to bring Professor Montero in every once in a while because of his authenticity. He cannot be denied. But they give him short shrift. So that they brought him on to talk. Now, the doc predicted the victory of President Trump. Okay. Well, see, they don't like that. So they brought him on, and he basically said everything up to Trump will win and Biden's going to lead us into war. Up to it. So they went to commercial, and you know when they come, they said, "Well, we're glad we had Montero here." You know, they tried to act like he hadn't been there, and they brought on Mark Lamont Hill and they tried to act like he wasn't there. Go forward to the night before the election, and it's a big rally, and it really looks like code name Party Girl. Vice President Harris was going to prevail. So the owner of URD, who was a personal friend of Professor Montero's, invited him to come back on the station, you know? And so Vice President Harris lost. He's still waiting by the phone. And I told him, I said, dog, they were setting you up. They were going to bring you in there and show you how wrong you were. You understand? But it didn't happen. Some of, some very prominent people, I've already mentioned some names, but I won't call Tony and say, why you supporting Trump? Why are people supporting Trump? Right. But now his phone, there's a deafening silence. Ain't nobody calling him for an interview saying, Doc, you were right. No, they would choke on that. So, we're still waiting for Professor Montero to be invited back to the voice of the Black community. You understand? This cat has never left the Black community. I mean, the literal demographic Black community, not the Black community that we're talking about here. He's one of the last remnants of and I guess me too. I'm 25th and Diamond. So we're the last with the William Dick, 25th and Diamond. So we're the last remnants of that Black community. But, Jared, they have been set adrift without a rudder because you have to have some semblance of education to be available to hear Professor Montero's worldview. Because what's important about today is concision. So you have to be concise. You got to get it quick. Well, concision supports the orthodoxy. If you're going to challenge the orthodoxy, one has to be able to elaborate and point to nuance. Well, there's no room for that in the context of the agenda setting media. That's why, you have to have your podcast. That's why you have to have your free school, because we don't spout the orthodoxy. We challenge the orthodoxy, which is one of Baldwin's great admonitions, challenge the orthodoxy. And that's what we do here. But our kids, they don't have the attention span, brother. In the schools, they're not being taught the extent. I mean, a moment of silence. How about a half hour of meditation and visualizing the future before you start the day? Prayer in the school. How about a little meditation to set yourself, to orient yourself, to prepare yourself to learn? That's what has to happen, Jared, for the jettison. My father calls it the unwashed. The hoi polloi, the plebes, to find a new direction. But right now, brother, they have been set adrift, what Bob Dylan said, with no direction home, like a complete unknown. And I don't know. Tony is the optimist, and I'm the pessimist. And somewhere in between us, there's hope.
I guess I was just curious because actually this brings up something that I was thinking about, like what time are like what's the real time that we're in? Like real time, And like the whole conversation about world movement of thought and like Du Bois being the origin, and like I had two questions, but the first one I want to ask a little bit less because you brought up so much from what you were talking about. And the question was, while Du Bois speaks to this moment in time, how, pretty much, because I think Emily, you had brought it up again, like you had brought up how Du Bois was like, I want to say something about the human, or something about like how you can. I think the whole conversation we're having today is really interesting, but what I do know is that we're in a counter-revolutionary thing right now. And like I do know that Du Bois isn't here to see that. So how is it via the introduction that Du Bois has answers that either the Trump movement or, like you said, the crisis in Ukraine, or even maybe you're saying the Blackness leadership class would look for, but can't find.
Mm-hmm.
And how is it that Du Bois answers the question that you're also asking about those kids that don't have direction, so-called, or so-called ideas, or so-called vision, because they're told, or like Doc was also explaining, manipulated to behave or respond to cultural manifestations of ideas of the human being, which is an alien derivative. It comes from an alien source. It's not like a human source. It's not,
Well, I would go back to what Sister Serafina, what Sister Emily said about Du Bois' thoughts being for now.
Yes.
You see, and that you're looking in the light, and that's not where the answers are in the dark. You got to go turn on the lights in the dark places. You know, you're looking in the light, they're shining the light where they want you to look. And that's not where the answer is. That's why you're not going to learn black. It's against the, they're trying to make it against the law now to teach black history now, you see. So that they're turning on the lights and telling you to look here, but the answers are in the dark. See, the answers are in Du Bois. I mean, that was so profoundly accurate what you said. And I have felt the same thing when I started reading Du Bois, and for me, especially in Black Reconstruction. You know, there are answers for now in Black Reconstruction. Philadelphia Negro, but Black Reconstruction. He provides answers then, and I'm also a Brother Eddie, a fan. No, it was other brother over here who was reading from Du Bois' essays. I'm also a fan of his essays, and I would refer you to his essay of May 13th, 1952, What's Wrong with the United States? And it could have been written it could have been written on the eve of this last election. And it's just tragic how accurate he was, how prescient he was. So indeed, I think that Du Bois should be taught to these people and to the young. It's not being taught because they have to have a new orientation, Serafina, because they're teaching them hip hop. They're teaching them, you know, they're putting turntables and microphones in the schools. And they want to be rappers. They want to be basketball players. Come on, man. If they don't want to be, I mean, what are their aspirations? What are they encouraged to be?
Well,
Please.
the other question that I did have, which I will bring up now, which is what Nuri, you had brought up about the comparison made between Leonardo da Vinci and Du Bois. And actually, Fati, your examples of the Catherine Denham and, you know, had rearranged something in my head about that comparison because how is it that Du Bois is the origin of world thought? And with your explanation of the polyglot or like even the dimensions of research and synthesis of like, you know, interrogation, whether it be through expression or like, and what I mean by its expression is in language, sound, dance, movement, science, like, you know, how things are explained. Also showed something about Leonardo da Vinci and his expansive range of investigations and tools of investigation, how he investigated, which is also similar, like you're saying, with Du Bois, and also similar with the majority of, I guess, maybe people who are emerging from that world movement of thought. And I would assume also like August Wilson. I would assume also the poet that you mentioned, I forget, Jill. I feel like there's that new person, that new language already that you had, that you're explaining, meaning the dimensions or the ways in which ideas are expressed or investigated are dependent upon a new understanding of time, a new understanding of space, and it developed a new expression, a new language, and I guess that's what's interesting to your point about the what type of person can you become, because through the exam, it's not even like maybe I have an assumption that even if you don't know Du Bois, you do have an expansive range of understanding and expansive questions of the world and existence, which would be able to be express itself if we weren't in such a totaling of like you can't become or can't learn or can't see or can't express of a moment in time. But I do think that it is possible that either those children or the majority of people have a variety of different interesting expressions that also are like with that right light that you're talking about, with the right sense of understanding how to use that kind of potential and power. There's like something that's a little bit asleep or something that's not fully activated. But I only say that also because I know, or I don't, I think like I'm on the train, right? And I'm thinking about how to write something for something me and Emily are working on. And like either experience happens or somebody interacts with you where it's like, oh, they're saying what I'm like thinking. And it's an interesting phenomenon because it's not like they really intended on it. And it also is something that you wanted to express in poetry or in a scene or to paint it. And so I'm saying like that recognition is something that can be used as a tool to express. But then at the same time, I think that I bumped into somebody else and he like I just have okay, so it was just an interesting experience. He was a painter, you know, he was like I was carrying the things that I had to show for Saturday. And he came up to me, he was like, do you show in galleries? Are you professional or whatever? I was like, you know what, I don't show in galleries. He's like, well, I do murals. And then he shows me like his graffiti stuff and he calls it murals. So it's like, you know, the term and that whole question of hip hop, you know, where, when, why, how, what does it mean, is all on the table. I'm not suggesting one or the other, right? But what I will say is that he did call his work murals. And I do know that the ways in which he knows ideas, or either you're talking about from Afro-Brazilian and the Caribbean, or Africa itself, civilization, you know, like there's this wellspring I feel like that we're sitting upon, that people are like that people have in a certain sense.
Yeah. Well, you know, you calling the so-called graffiti a mural is kind of like dressing up pop culture as culture.
Okay.
And I would make, and Brother Fatih, maybe you could help with this, but I make a distinction between pop culture and culture. You know, with pop culture, it is the superficial, it is the formulaic, it is the easily mass produced. Culture, it is old, it is nuanced, it is authentic, it is unique, it is difficult to reproduce.
I guess
Wait a second, let me finish. So that, I call hip hop pop culture. I don't call hip hop culture. I certainly would call Coltrane culture, but I would also go out on a limb here, call Motown culture, even though it was very formulaic, but it was original. It was original in its formula. Paul McCartney, he said, we came up listening to Motown, but what we recognize is that it was so much the same. And I mean, that was a hallmark that Berry Gordy was going for. Four Tops came out with Sugar Pie Honey Bunch. He came right back with the same old song with a new meaning since you've been gone. Well, the Beatles said, well, we're going to go out of our way to make sure that each song is unique. So I think, and I would like Brother Fateh to comment.
Yeah, I was going
is that
to-
a reasonable distinction to talk about a distinction
No,
between
well, see,
pop culture and culture?
you know what happens now, if we look at this tape, and I'm using Catherine Dunham because we're not talking about songs.
And we're still answering your question, sir.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer.
Fatih, could you tell everybody who Catherine Dunham was?
Oh, how many of you heard of Catherine Dunham? Yeah, basically, some people associate her with Lena Horne in the Stormy Weather movie. She's way back in time, but she became known to the public more like in television. And I forget the time it came. And she was known for looking like Carmen Miranda. She would dress kind of tropical looking, having the dress open. So her stereotype was this sexy mulatto. The linda mulata, Cubana. You're right. And then when she walked on stage and she could dance, she would dance like Carmen Miranda. But nobody knew her as an academician, pursuing a PhD and got some Guggenheim, some type of fellowship to do field research in the Caribbean. Because she was under the umbrella of Melville Herskovitz, supposedly the expert in Afro-American, mainly Afro-Latin culture. So you have to understand something. Prior to that time, the idea in Latin America, they were all mestizo. So Herskovitz saying, oh no, you got a lot of African friends. So Herskovitz's theory was the most African people in the Western Hemisphere are Brazilians, Cubans, and Haitians. So how do you prove that? You do field research and you do ethnographic research, meaning the idea wasn't the bourgeoisie was assimilated, so you don't study them because they're so whitewashed. They're not going to give any evidence, right? And getting back to Catherine Dunham, see, I think Serafina. Yeah, I think what it is, what she's hearing, because she's art, I can tell she's a creative person. See, when you're a creative person, academicians can't help you. You know what it is? They're good talkers. I know ethnomusicologists can tell you, they can do transcriptions of African music, and I say, I'll do like that. I say, write that down. I get the timbales out and start dancing. I said, look at me. Oh, well, I just do ethnography. So what I discovered is a lot of people that go into ethnomusicology, they can't play music. You get a drummer off the corner of Fifth and Lehigh that can play arrangement. I played with Puerto Rican bands for years, and the temple crew would say to me, how do you deal with those dreadful hillbillies? I said, I'm a dreadful hillbilly. And I was into guaguancó, mambo, rumba, bomba, plena. I would say this stuff to them. They said, well, can they read music? I said, well, I said, you asked the wrong question. You know, I said, it's a complicated polyrhythmic structure. See, what happens, and because I compose too, and I collaborate with drummers a lot, and they don't read European music, but they know how to graph things out. That's what I mean by literacy. Now, the question is, how do you now we're going to interconnect all of this. Pedagogy, K through 12. You know what I do when I teach Spanish? I do call and response. Like I go back and forth. Even when I teach English, I say, the students say, motion. Now what do you hear? And I go back and forth to call and response. So when they walk in our room, yeah, but that sounds like you got a choir there. I said, well, that's what, I said, no, it's an African thing. See, I learned in Africa, I used to walk down the street and the teacher would say, ale, ale, ale. And the students say, alleluia, ale. And then I would say, and they were teaching poems and things. Now, when I come back to the States, they say, well, here's the book. I said, look, you got the wrong book. I said, my students learn the alphabet. B, C. I had African Americans learn the alphabet and we were going back and forth. Ache, yeah. And they learned, and they, okay. And they said, is that not the curriculum? I said, do you want me here? I said, I stopped teaching K through 12. Getting back to performance, see, one of the reasons I had to let tempo go with the classical music, I love all types of music. They wanted me to take on their protocol and their gestures. Like when I played the banjo, boom, 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 boom. But they said, well, you have to bang it like that. I said, look, you like my banjo, you listen to it. You don't like it, don't listen to it. See, it gets into performance. Like, see, getting back, Du Bois didn't sing solo songs. That's what you're saying. Dunham performed Afro-Caribbean dancing. See, it's one thing when you talk about Africa, another thing when you perform it. See, when I'm playing salsa, I'm actually performing Afro-Latin music. Meaning you can't be polite about it. When you don't, it's nothing but you can't be refined.
No.
Getting back, and I'm interconnected to Baldwin's style versus Du Bois. Baldwin basically would say something like this. He said, you know why I'm this color? Because your great-grandfather slept with my great-grandmother. Oh, that's disgusting. But Du Bois never say that. See, you got style. See, what I learned how to do is I go in, and I'm sort of like an imposter. If I want to get a master's degree, I said, well, let me play a couple of Mauritanians. That's from Spain. I said, well, they think I'm, yeah. And then once I get the degree, then I play the war on folk. So because you're dealing with an so you got different problems. You got Anglo-centric. They're even anti-Hispanic, and that's a European language. And then you bring in the Congo. You have to understand, in Philadelphia, the Congo was a symbol for Puerto Ricans of cultural identity. Wasn't the Spanish language, meaning, the essence of salsa, if you can play bum, 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 that would be my audition. The band leader would say, can you do Montuno? And he said, so I go, bum, 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 you got the job. Now he brings the temple boy in, Mozart, Beethoven. He said, can you play Mozart? Oh, yes, I have a master's degree. He said, ding, 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 this is how you fail. So to pass the audition, it was the oral tradition. Now, what happened in the Philadelphia? The denial, the denigration of oral traditions and the impact and its use as a pedagogical tool have been literally thrown out. Maybe it's in the African American community, you hear it in the gospel music, in Motown.
Yes, sir.
That call and response,
yes, sir.
What have you, and you foment and foster the memory through repetition and call and response. Now, if the focus is on so-called literacy, and I tell you, but don't imitate what I write, just use your own words. You don't even have the vocabulary. Then say, oh, IEP, retarded. They have these new words and what have you. So what is needed? They need to, I call them children of the sun. Whether it's the Caribbean, I don't care if you speak Spanish, Portuguese, or English, it's something about people of African descent. If they still got it in them, they respond to body movement and the call and response. And their memory. You get, say, even if you clap, and then you tell them to do it. They do tap, tap, tap. You do. and they'll do do. And so that means their perception is on a high level. Now you may go to the bourgeois school district and do, oh mommy, I can't do that. Because it's culture. See, a lot of what I discovered, a lot of people of European extraction are they good with script, and they remember and they memorize syntax. A lot of tropical people, and see, a lot of African Americans still got it in them.
Yes.
They talk like they're playing a drum.
Right.
So the syntax is not controlled by the grammar they learn in school. It's controlled, and then the tendency to regularize irregular verbs. And then you say, well, he doesn't know grammar. But he knows the function of the grammatical character. You know, that he knows what, how do you modify, like you said, that low down, sleazy dog. Well, you got, that's two double adjectives. You know, so the tendency in Caribbean culture and African American culture, they put more emphasis on the modifiers than the actual substantive.
Yes, sir.
So in terms of linguistics, that's what came up in California with Ebonics.
Well,
The man was trying to tell them you must take in consideration the quote native language. Oh, it's not a native language. He was trying to say that the African syntax you hear, the word order, the modifiers, the verb modifiers, you know, like, and the idea of inventing modifiers. No good, lying, dog snitching, winning. You know, I mean, you got what, four, you got, they say, or like you should hear what they call Trump. I hear him in my school. Oh, they got like 10 adjectives. A double talking, racist, I mean, they got 5. You should hear the students. And where do they get it from? But what is the process? The process that's going on linguistically, the person has a feeling about somebody and he's creating words to show you how disgusted he is.
yes, sir.
And then the teacher says, oh, well, could you use the vocabulary that we had last week? Like one student, this man said to the student, oh, yeah, you have to extrapolate something. And then he said, boy, looked, you don't know what that is? You're in the 7th grade, you know? I said, I said, look, you should have done like this. Pull it out. I said, in other words, they systematically set them up for failure.
Yes, sir.
By overusing academic language with the assumption that you in the 6th grade, you should know what modification is, or stratification. One man said, well, we're going to talk about medieval stratification. I said, why didn't you draw some pictures on the board? Draw a pyramid and put high, middle, low. He should know what that is. So I went to my supervisor. I said, is this all a conspiracy? Well, his problem is, I said, no, I'm talking about some of the African Americans do. To make a long story short, getting back to, Baldwin. See, one of the reasons I don't talk a lot of faculty meetings, because I have a tendency to, when they talk too long and you're talking around circles, you know how you see TV in the Senate and the Democrats say, well, we're really trying, look, it gets to a point that you have to go and say, Trump, sit down, and you stop this nonsense. And you, Rubio, you need to go back to Florida. And Schumer, you need to retire. And you need to see, it comes to a point, this is what's lacking in this so-called Philadelphia school district, predominantly African American. Okay, you get the 2 types of African American teachers. You got the ones who want to get tenured, and you want to get a promotion, and you want to get out of the classroom. Most of them, they want to be supervised.
Yes, sir.
Then you have the ones who are from the neighborhoods and know what to do, but they can't use the call and response because they tell them it's not part of the curriculum. So the larger majority that want to teach, they are more than open to cultural relevant pedagogy. They don't get any support, you know. And 2, they say in Spanish, esa gente quiere que yo me ponga muñeco They want me to be a puppet. They want me to, like the marionettes. Like you don't teach. You just get open the book.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. And they always tell me, well, I don't see you with the book. I said, look, why don't you go get a cup of coffee?
So it turns out that he can call his graffiti a mural.
Yeah, well, see, the thing, it gets into aesthetics. See,
Yes.
the African American or African based aesthetic, for instance, you take music,
Yes.
like the cantabile sound when I play Chopin.
Right.
That's the essence of European culture. That's the refinement. That's like the difference between this type of move and when you say,
Yeah, right.
yeah, so the rustic, aggressive moves of a bongo, like the dancing, the moving of the hip. Look at ballet.
Yep.
The hips don't move.
Right.
But you know why? It's implicit in terms of copulation.
Right.
And that's disgusting
Yes, sir.
with this idealized European aesthetic. Now, when you deal with the comb and the guaguancó, now the more you bang it, that the aesthetic that you're going to get people to dance, that's a successful performance. Whereas the cantabile style, the sweeter you are, the more refined you are. Now, if you come from the hood, you fail that test. So the question, what do you do as a pedagogue when you're developing lesson plans for rough edge children?
Yes, sir.
Because not because they want to be, two things happening. First of all, being marginalized, ignored, and then you take the poverty and the idea of having to show power, particularly as a male, when you're in the neighborhood, you can't walk around looking dainty.
Right.
You have to look like I'll take you out of here if you say the wrong thing to me.
Yes.
So, see, I see it like, okay, like I told me, students come to me, I want to go to temple, I'll teach them Bach minuets, inventions, Mozart. And then I tell them, the essence, they say, oh, I compose music, so let me make something up. I said, the essence to me is when you create something within you. They said, well, I want to be a jazz. I said, well, you make sure you understand, or like if some of my Puerto Rican students say, I want to play, yo quiero tocar montuno. Yo quiero tocar guaguancó. That's to him the essence. I said, well, look, but if you want to go to Solomon School, you got to learn to read. So why don't we do this? The deal is we're going to go for the guaguancó, but you have to bite sometimes the bullet to just get yourself in the door.
You do.
But he has to know that the essence is the guaguancó. That the minuet is just a means to an end. It's like saying, okay, you want me to be the muñeco? Unspoken. So see, what you're going through, I meet so many high school students, they have so much talent, so much desire to learn and express themselves. And as soon as they start to express themselves, nipped in the butt.
Yeah.
And then you got the muñeco, is the part of the conspiracy, the puppet. Then you got the supervisor. Then you got the one who doesn't do anything, writes things downtown. Then you got the state.
Right.
Because I'm certified in Jersey, and I know you got this hierarchy. So you got the king, you got the dukes, the barons, then you got the merchants, the hustlers. Then you got the serfs, and the teachers are the teachers are basically in between a serf and probably, I don't know. The question is, are you paid or not paid?
Yes, sir.
But basically, then you got the students who basically chain gang. You put a chain around them, and you have it over your head. And if you don't do certain things, like they say, I want you to be creative, but as soon as they do something, then you put a red pencil, you didn't say you're not processing correctly. But what do you want me to say? So I tell the teacher, look, why don't you just tell them how you want to write? I want to know I want them to use their own words. He doesn't have the words. No, why don't you tell them specifically how you would prefer it? Like when they do creative writing, you don't start out these children with creative stuff. You got to teach them more systematic. Like you don't have to use grammatical terms, but teach them how to describe things. Use modifiers, not imaginary things. They want everybody to critique a novel. I didn't want to go all. I know I was connecting Baldwin style versus Du Bois with Then I brought up Catherine Dunham. Basically, what I'm saying is you end up being, as a person of color, at least I'm bicultural in that I have to shift not only from languages, but style. Even when I teach Spanish, and they heard me talking on the phone to somebody from Dominican Republic, and I said, ¿Cómo se encuentra? And they said, well, is that in the book? I said, no, it's like saying, how do you find yourself? Was that correct Spanish? I said, that's how Dominicans talk. Like in Puerto Ricans use the word bochinche for gossip. And it's not in the book. and so they heard me saying, somebody told me, oh, say, eso es mucho bochinche. And then they say, oh, Mr. Russell, what is that word? I said, but in the Puerto Rican community, that's gossip. You know? And then, so see, even with language, why do you think a lot of the Puerto Rican students in Philadelphia a lot of times wouldn't pass Spanish? Yes. Because they were trying to teach them a more, actually, it was more than European, it was more like a Castilian. Yeah. Spanish, even the Spanish, it's like the Spanish crown speaks. They're not even going to teach you the gypsies of Andalusia. You know, that sound, Canary Islands Spanish sounds more like the Caribbean. Whereas in northern Spain, they use a So one woman told me, oh no, ella habla un dialecto. I said, no, she speaks Caribbean. They call it Caribeño. If you ask the average person in the Caribbean how they speak, like some Dominicans say, oh, yo hablo Dominicano. They don't say I speak Spanish. Because he's really trying to tell you indirectly that he sees it as an entity in itself. Yeah. Exactly. And not, I'm speaking a broken down version of Spanish. You know, and like you say, merengue, that's an Afro-based tradition. Bomba from Puerto Rico, rumba from Cuba. That's the word is from Spain, but the playing of the drums and all that. Yeah, so I didn't want to take up that, and I was actually addressing a lot of educators, K through 12, that I know what you're going through, but many times you have to find a way to circumvent. You know, like you hear, yeah, I hear what you say. Okay, good, wonderful meeting. And because if you teach in Philadelphia, like where I'm in Jersey, okay, I'm teaching in Jersey City. I teach at Ocean County. I have adult ESL. And these are all farmers. People went to 6th grade from Latin America. And it's, so when you have to deal directly with all these people, you have to find out where they are. And you must find a way to, I say circumvent, if not manipulate the administration, make them think that you're dumbing them down. Because basically what you end up seeing is if somebody hates to come to school and they hate looking at you and they hate when you give them an assignment every day and it gets worse, that you know something is wrong. And then a lot of times you're going to take the bull by the horns and just say, look, I'm not going to be a part of this conspiracy. You know, like when I tried to when one student wanted to play the conga on Black history, he was Puerto Rican. They said, well, this is Black History Week. I said, well, he's trying to express his blackness, get into the blackness. To a Latin American, blackness is not hip hop or rap. Right. It's guaguancó. They don't call it blackness. They call it sabor. They call it salsa. They got words for it. It means it's the opposite of the European. So you can't get hooked up in because he doesn't say the word negro, he doesn't like it. They don't use that. They'll even say, when they say somebody's dark skinned and good looking, they say trigueñito. The color of wheat, sweet color of wheat, dark wheat. Like, yeah, trigueño is the color of wheat. So see, the problem with language is a lot of people say, oh, well, negro, well, in Spanish, it's usually referring to a color, clothes or something. Now sometimes I say negrito, but even that ito makes it something positive. Oh, él es mi negrito. He's my chocolate homeboy. So, see, that's why it's important also, you don't have to, it's not learning bad Spanish or learning bad word, understanding the culture. And you understand Puerto Rico was a colony. Dominican Republic was a colony. People talk about what they went through here. You had Haiti, that revolution, you read some of the accounts in the colonial records of the colonial period. Castration, amputation, raping the women, you know, you name it. Oh, they put these people to shame up here. You know, so I would say and this is related to the preschool. I think the misconception that I hear, first of all, you deal with age. Now, what unites it is colonialism. See, when you deal with imperialism and colonial oppression, that was, you're talking about 500 years. The British in India, the British coming here, you know, South Africa. See, that's the connecting link. Now, if you just say blackness and whiteness, an ignorant person or short-minded person, he can't make the connection. But when you talk about imperialism and colonialism, and everybody can come to the table and say, well, yeah, in my country, I came from Samoa, and this is what happened. And he shows the impact of colonialism on him. Or the French colonization of Vietnam. You may say, well, yeah, well, why do you see all these French words in Vietnam?
Yes.
You know, or somebody from Martinique,
Yes.
Guadeloupe. Yeah, well, this is what Catherine Duncan found out. She saw that when you mix the cultures together, you mix the African with the French, you get one variation. You mix the African with the English, you get another one. The African with the Dutch, the African with the Spanish, with the Portuguese. She talked about this stuff. Why do you think didn't you notice how they wrote out a history? They don't even have all bibliographies. Most people will look at me and I say, well, anthropology, if you don't study Catherine Dunham, you want to understand the Caribbean. She had piles and piles of publications. And then when she started to dance troupe, she wrote out the choreography. She wrote it out. Exactly. Yes, okay, I didn't want to.
Okay, thank you, Fatih. So maybe we should, it's after 2, so maybe we should conclude for today and come back next week.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I'm very proud of all of you. Some of you I've known since the pandemic when I was virtual, and that you really progressed, and I'm very proud of you. And I'm impressed. You know, especially the doctor.
Yes. Doctor.
Yes.
They enjoyed the